Sign this now, or I'll make sure you never work in this industry again. The words hung between us as my boss, Finley Burke, slid the resignation letter across the glass conference table. His knuckles whitened against the document's edge, fingers spreading like pale spiders. The conference room felt impossibly small, the walls drawing inward with each shallow breath I took. I need this today, Sarah. His voice dropped to a whisper so the employees passing by couldn't hear. Your performance hasn't met expectations. We both know this is for the best. 3 years of doubling department metrics flashed through my mind. The late nights, the canceled weekends, the ideas he'd claimed as his own in executive meetings. And now, after I'd questioned those unusual transactions in last quarter's reports, this ambush. I lifted the pen, my vision tunneling to a pinpoint. The resignation letter blurred before me, but one phrase remained crystal clear: voluntary resignation. I glanced up at Finley's triumphant expression, at the security guard lingering just outside the door, and made my decision. What he didn't know was that I'd been preparing for this moment. For weeks, I documented every irregular request, every questionable directive, every veiled threat. I'd studied employment law until dawn broke through my apartment blinds. I signed without protest, but when Finley stepped away to answer a call, I made one subtle alteration to the standard text. His mistake? Underestimating the power of a single word. Before I continue this story, I need you to understand something important. Knowledge is the weapon that never jams. If you've ever felt powerless against someone who seemed untouchable, stay with me. Because what I'm about to share isn't just about revenge. It's about reclaiming your power in a world designed to make you surrender it. My name is Syra Menon, and until 3 months ago, I was the lead financial analyst at Beckworth Industries. I'm 34, unmarried, with a master's degree in business analytics and a certification in forensic accounting that I'd earned through night classes. Most people describe me as meticulous, some say obsessive, about details. I color code my calendar, alphabetize my spice rack, and can spot a numerical discrepancy like most people notice a flash of lightning. My parents immigrated from India before I was born, settling in a small Midwestern town where my father opened an electronics repair shop. Always check the smallest components first, he'd say, hunched over circuit boards. The tiniest connection often causes the biggest failures. This became my life philosophy. Pay attention to details others overlook. When I joined Beckworth 4 years ago, the company was expanding rapidly, opening new offices across the country. The CEO, Aubrey Beckworth, had a reputation for innovation and inclusivity. The company's slogan, "Building Better Futures Together," adorned every wall, email signature, and coffee mug. I believed in it, perhaps naively. Finley Burke became my direct supervisor 2 years into my tenure. He'd transferred from the West Coast office with glowing recommendations and an impressive resume. Tall, with prematurely silver hair and a voice that commanded attention, Finley moved through the office like he owned it. The executive team adored him. The board praised his fresh perspectives. The problems began subtly. First, my name disappeared from project proposal credits. Then came the exclusion from meetings I'd previously attended. My reports required multiple revisions for clarity, while male colleagues with similar findings received immediate approval. "You're being paranoid," my colleague Theo whispered when I mentioned the pattern. "Finlay's just demanding. He's like that with everyone." But he wasn't. I started keeping notes, dates, times, witnesses, exact phrases. When Finley praised Vincent for the quarterly projection model I'd created, when he interrupted my presentations but gave others unbroken attention, when he scheduled team lunches during my standing therapy appointment, despite my calendar clearly showing the conflict. Still, I excelled. Our department's efficiency increased by 22% under my systematic approach to workflow management. I created a predictive analysis tool that saved the company millions in procurement costs. I stayed visible, valuable, and vigilant. Then came the financial discrepancies. It started with an anomaly in the third quarter reports, transfers between departmental budgets that lacked proper authorization codes, small amounts, easily overlooked, but following a pattern. I cross-referenced past quarters and found similar irregularities dating back to Finlay's arrival. These transactions need explanation, I said during our one-on-one meeting, sliding the highlighted printouts across his desk. The authorization chain is incomplete. Finlay barely glanced at the papers. Accounting approved these. You're overstepping, Syra. But accounting requires director-level signatures for interdepartmental transfers. These don't have them. His expression shifted then, something cold replacing his usual dismissive smile. Drop it. This isn't your concern. I didn't drop it. Instead, I created a secure folder on my personal drive and continued gathering evidence. The pattern expanded. Budget reallocations coinciding with performance bonuses, vendor contracts with inflated pricing to subsidiaries with obscured ownership structures, expense reports with consistent anomalies. The hostility escalated in precise increments. My performance review, previously exceeding expectations, suddenly cited communication issues and failure to align with team objectives. My project assignments shifted to administrative tasks. My emails to other department heads went unanswered. He's building a case against you, warned Veronique from legal during an after-work drink. Be careful. Document everything. I was already documenting everything, but now I added evening research sessions on employment law, corporate whistleblower protections, and constructive dismissal precedents. I installed a recording app on my phone. I forwarded key emails to my personal account. I took photographs of documents that mysteriously disappeared from shared drives. The final escalation came after the executive quarterly review. Aubrey Beckworth had praised my procurement analysis, asking me to present at the next board meeting. Excellent work, Syra, she said, squeezing my shoulder. This is exactly the kind of innovative thinking we need. Finlay's expression remained pleasant, but his eyes tracked me like a predator throughout the remainder of the meeting. That afternoon, my access to several critical databases was revoked for security protocol updates. The next day, an email announced that Vincent would handle the board presentation due to his familiarity with the broader context. When I questioned this decision, Finlay called me into his office. Your attitude has become problematic, he said, his voice carefully modulated as he closed the door. Several colleagues have expressed concerns about your collaborative abilities. Which colleagues? I asked. I'd like to address their concerns directly. That's not appropriate. This is a pattern, Syra. First, the unfounded accusations about financial irregularities. Now this insubordination. Asking for clarification isn't insubordination. He leaned forward, lowering his voice. Let me be clear. Your position here is becoming tenuous. I recommend focusing on improving your performance rather than questioning management decisions. That night, I met with an employment attorney. Eleanor Pham listened carefully to my account, reviewing the evidence I'd gathered. This is textbook hostile work environment, she said, adjusting her rectangular glasses. The pattern is clear, and your documentation is excellent. But here's the reality. These cases are exhausting, expensive, and often career-damaging, even when you win. So I should just quit? No. She tapped my folder of evidence. If they want you gone, make them pay for it. Constructive dismissal settlements can be substantial with evidence like yours. But be prepared. They'll likely try to force a resignation first. She was right. 3 days later, Finlay began CCing HR on trivial issues with my work. A week after that, I received my first formal warning for missing deadlines on assignments given with impossible timeframes. The next week, my workspace was relocated to an isolated corner near the server room, where the constant hum of equipment made phone conversations nearly impossible. Through it all, I maintained meticulous records. I responded to every accusation with documented facts. I remained unfailingly professional in every interaction, and I prepared for the inevitable confrontation. It came sooner than expected. On a Wednesday morning, my calendar updated with a mandatory meeting in Conference Room B. No agenda, no other attendees, just Finlay. As I walked toward the conference room, Veronique passed me in the hallway, her expression tense. He's been in with HR all morning, she murmured without breaking stride. I nodded. my emergency plan crystallizing. In my bag was a folder containing copies of all my evidence, organized chronologically. My phone was recording, and I'd studied the standard resignation template used by Beckworth Industries, including all its legal implications. Which brings us back to that glass conference table, the resignation letter, and Finlay's ultimatum. When he stepped away to answer a call, I didn't hesitate. With a steady hand, I crossed out voluntary resignation and wrote above it, constructive dismissal due to hostile work environment. I added the date and time in the margin. My writing neat and clear. Finlay returned, snatched the paper without reading it, and smiled with the satisfaction of a man who believes he's won. Clear your workspace by end of day. Security will escort you out. I understand, I said, maintaining eye contact. I'll need this documented for my records. His smile faltered briefly. HR will provide the necessary paperwork. I nodded and stood to leave. As I reached the door, I turned back. Just to confirm, this meeting was at your request, correct? To discuss my employment status? Yes, he said impatiently, as documented in the letter you just signed. Thank you for clarifying. I closed the door behind me, heart pounding but mind clear. In the bathroom, I took deep breaths until my hands stopped trembling. Then I called Eleanor Pham. It happened, I said. Exactly as you predicted. Did you make the amendment? Yes, he didn't notice. Good. Send me everything now. I'll have the formal complaint ready within the hour. By 3 o'clock, I had packed my personal items into a small box. As promised, a security guard named Luis waited nearby, looking uncomfortable with his assignment. I'm sorry about this, Ms. Menon, he said quietly. Never made sense to me why they'd let go of someone like you. Thank you, Luis. I appreciate that. Before leaving, I made 2 final stops. First, to the Human Resources Department, where I handed Director Imani Wilson a sealed envelope. This is a formal complaint of constructive dismissal and hostile work environment, I said, my voice steady. It includes the altered resignation letter that Mr. Burke provided today, which I amended before signing to accurately reflect the situation. I've also included documentation of the ongoing issues that led to this point. Imani's expression remained neutral, but her eyes widened slightly. I'll review this immediately. My attorney will be in contact tomorrow morning. She has copies of everything in that envelope. My second stop was to Theo's desk. He looked up, startled by my approach with the security guard waiting several feet away. You're leaving? He asked, rising halfway from his chair. Not by choice, I replied. But before I go, check the shared drive. Q, finance, quarterly, historical. Focus on the transfer patterns in folders marked with Finlay's initials. Compare them with the executive bonus schedule. His brow furrowed. Sarah, what are you saying? Just look, and be careful who you discuss it with. I squeezed his shoulder and walked away. Luis escorted me to the lobby, carrying my box despite my protests. At the main entrance, he paused. You know, Ms. Menon, I've worked security here for 12 years. Seen a lot of people come and go. The ones who leave quietly when they've done nothing wrong, they never come back. But the ones who stand their ground, he smiled slightly, they often do. If you've ever faced injustice that seemed too powerful to fight, if you've ever swallowed your words because speaking up felt too dangerous, stay with me. Because what happened next changed not just my career, but my understanding of power itself. Before I continue, take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel if you believe in standing up for what's right, even when it's terrifying. Hit that notification bell because the conclusion to this story reveals exactly how knowledge, preparation, and courage can transform a moment of powerlessness into justice that ripples beyond anything you could imagine. That night, I didn't sleep. Instead, I sat on my apartment balcony, watching the city lights while replaying the day's events. The air felt different somehow, lighter, despite the uncertainty ahead. For the first time in months, I breathed fully, without the tightness in my chest that had become so familiar I'd stopped noticing it. My phone buzzed at 7:13 the next morning. Unknown number. Syra Menon speaking. Ms. Menon, this is Imani Wilson from Human Resources. Her voice sounded strained. We've reviewed your documentation and need you to come in this morning for a meeting with senior leadership. Am I to understand I'm still employed at Beckworth then? A pause. Your employment status is complicated at present. The document you submitted creates a legal situation we need to address immediately. I'll be there at 9 with my attorney. That won't be. I'll be there at 9 with my attorney, I repeated, my voice quiet but firm. Or we can proceed directly to formal litigation. Another pause. 9 o'clock. 14th floor conference room. I texted Eleanor immediately, and she agreed to meet me at a coffee shop near the office at 8:30. When I arrived, she was already there, immaculate in a charcoal suit, spreading documents across a corner table. They're panicking, she said without preamble. I received 3 calls from their legal department last night, each more conciliatory than the last. Your documentation is exceptional. What should I expect? They'll try to minimize the situation. They'll offer settlements with confidentiality clauses. They'll attempt to isolate Finlay's behavior from company liability. She shuffled the papers into a precise stack. Our position is simple. The company enabled a hostile work environment through negligent oversight. We have evidence of both the hostility and the financial improprieties you identified. And if they refuse to acknowledge it? Eleanor's smile was thin and precise. Then we proceed with formal charges that will trigger external audits and public disclosure requirements. Their choice. At 8:57, we walked through Beckworth's main entrance. Luis was at the security desk, his eyebrows rising in surprise as I approached. Ms. Menon, he smiled slightly. Didn't expect to see you back so soon. Circumstances change, I replied, signing the visitor log. That they do. He handed me a temporary badge. 14th floor is pretty busy this morning. Lots of unexpected meetings. In the elevator, Eleanor reviewed our strategy one final time. Let them speak first. We need to understand their position before showing our full hand. The 14th floor reception area hummed with unusual activity. Assistants rushed between offices, arms full of files. Through glass walls, I glimpsed executives in intense discussions. Near the main conference room, Theo stood talking with Veronique, both looking pale and serious. When Theo spotted me, his eyes widened, and he gave an almost imperceptible nod. Imani Wilson emerged from the conference room, her usual composure slightly fractured. Ms. Manon, thank you for coming. And you must be. Eleanor Pham, legal counsel for Ms. Menon. Eleanor extended her hand. Shall we begin? Inside the conference room sat Aubrey Beckworth herself, flanked by the company's general counsel and chief operating officer. Conspicuously absent was Finlay. Ms. Menon, Aubrey began, her normally warm voice formal. We've reviewed your complaint and supporting documentation. The allegations are serious and concerning. They're not allegations, I corrected quietly. They're documented facts. The general counsel, a man named Pascal, whose last name I'd never caught, cleared his throat. Before we continue, we want to emphasize that Beckworth Industries takes workplace conduct extremely seriously. If there have been violations of our policies, we want to address them appropriately. If? Eleanor echoed, her tone making the single syllable sound dangerous. Aubrey raised a hand slightly. We're not disputing Ms. Menon's experiences. We're trying to understand the full scope of the situation. The scope extends beyond my client, Eleanor said. Based on our preliminary investigation, multiple employees have experienced similar treatment under Mr. Burke's supervision. A flash of genuine surprise crossed Aubrey's face. You've spoken with other employees? No, I interjected. But they've begun speaking with your HR department as of yesterday afternoon. I believe 3 women from different departments have already come forward. Imani nodded almost imperceptibly, confirming my statement. We're also concerned about the financial irregularities Ms. Menon identified, Eleanor continued. Those require immediate investigation by independent auditors. Pascal shifted uncomfortably. We have internal audit procedures, which failed to catch these discrepancies for 2 years. I finished. That suggests either negligence or complicity in your financial oversight systems. The room fell silent. Aubrey studied me with new intensity, as if seeing me clearly for the first time. What exactly are you seeking, Ms. Menon? She finally asked. Eleanor opened her portfolio. Full reinstatement with back pay from the date of the constructive dismissal. A comprehensive independent investigation into both the hostile work environment and financial irregularities. Accountability for all parties involved in either creating or enabling these conditions. And structural changes to prevent similar situations in the future. And if we counter with a settlement offer? Pascal asked. Then we proceed with formal charges that will necessitate public disclosure. Eleanor replied evenly. My client isn't interested in being silenced with money. Aubrey leaned forward. And Mr. Burke? What do you expect regarding his position? I met her gaze directly. That's for you to determine after a proper investigation. But I will not work under his supervision again. The meeting continued for another hour, cycling through legalities, processes, and next steps. By its conclusion, I had been formally reinstated with temporary reassignment to the executive analysis team, reporting directly to the COO. An independent investigative firm would arrive the following day, and Finley had been placed on administrative leave pending the investigation's outcome. As we prepared to leave, Aubrey asked Eleanor for a moment alone with me. After a glance to confirm I was comfortable with this, Eleanor stepped outside. I owe you an apology, Aubrey said once we were alone. I pride myself on building an ethical company where everyone can thrive. I failed to see what was happening in your department. Hierarchies can create blind spots, I replied, even for the most well-intentioned leaders. She nodded slowly. The financial discrepancies you identified, how extensive do you believe they are? Significant enough to affect quarterly reports, systematic enough to suggest intentional manipulation, and patterned in ways that correlate with executive bonus structures. Something hardened in her expression. I see. That changes the nature of this situation considerably. Yes, it does. I stood to leave. One question, if I may. Was Finley informed of my reinstatement? He was notified of his administrative leave this morning. He doesn't yet know the full circumstances. She paused. He's expected to clear his office tomorrow morning under supervision. As I exited the conference room, Theo was waiting near the elevators. You magnificent, terrifying woman, he whispered as I approached. The entire finance department is in upheaval. They've locked down all the servers Finley had access to. Did you look at those folders? He nodded. I did, and I made copies before reporting it. The patterns were impossible to miss once you knew where to look. He hesitated. I should have listened when you first raised concerns. I'm sorry. What matters is that you looked eventually. Truth requires witnesses to have power. The next week unfolded with dizzying speed. The independent investigators established a temporary office on the 12th floor, interviewing dozens of employees. I spent hours walking them through my documentation, explaining the patterns I'd identified in both workplace behavior and financial records. By Friday, the count of employees who had reported inappropriate behavior from Finlay had reached 11, 8 women and 3 men, spanning multiple departments. The financial investigation had expanded to include relationships with 3 vendor companies and unusual patterns in project allocations. I returned to my regular workspace, now relocated to a bright corner near the finance team's central hub. Colleagues who had previously avoided eye contact now stopped by with coffee and questions. Some apologized for their silence. Others shared stories of their own uncomfortable experiences. The atmosphere throughout the office had shifted, tension releasing in some places, intensifying in others as people reconsidered their own complicity in what had happened. On Wednesday of the second week, Eleanor called with an update. The initial findings are damning, she said. The investigators have identified what appears to be a kickback scheme involving vendor contracts. Finlay was routing business to companies where he had undisclosed financial interests, then manipulating internal budgets to hide the inflated costs. How much money are we talking about? Preliminary estimate is $1.2 million over 2 years, and they've only examined about half the contracts flagged in your documentation. I pressed my hand against the window of my apartment, feeling the cool glass against my palm. What happens next? The company has 2 choices. Handle this internally with termination and potential civil recovery, or involve law enforcement for criminal charges. Given the scope, I suspect they'll have to do the latter. She was right. The following day, Aubrey called an all-staff meeting. Her normally perfect appearance showed subtle signs of strain, a missed button on her blazer, hair pulled back more severely than usual. "I want to address the ongoing investigation directly," she began, her voice carrying across the packed cafeteria. "What began as a workplace conduct complaint has uncovered financial improprieties that cannot be ignored or handled internally. We have filed formal reports with the appropriate authorities, who will be conducting their own investigation." A murmur rippled through the room. "I take full responsibility for the oversight failures that allowed this to happen," she continued. "We are implementing immediate changes to our financial controls, reporting structures, and management oversight. Most importantly, we are creating new channels for employees to report concerns without fear of retaliation." She paused, scanning the room. "To those who experienced mistreatment and felt unable to speak up, I apologize. To those who did speak up and weren't heard, I apologize more deeply. And to the person who finally forced us to listen," her eyes found mine, "I am both sorry and grateful." The changes came rapidly after that. New financial oversight protocols, restructured reporting relationships, mandatory training on workplace conduct and whistleblower protections. The investigation expanded, then concluded after 6 weeks with a comprehensive report that the executive team reviewed with ashen faces. Finlay never returned to the building after his administrative leave began. According to office whispers, he had hired an aggressive defense attorney and was attempting to negotiate immunity in exchange for information about broader involvement in the financial schemes, implying that others in leadership had known or participated. 3 months after I'd amended that resignation letter, I received 2 unexpected communications. The first was an email from Aubrey, asking me to consider a new position, Director of Financial Integrity, reporting directly to her with oversight of compliance across all departments. The second was a text from an unknown number. "You've ruined me. Hope you're satisfied with what you've done." Finlay's final attempt at intimidation, sent the day before his arraignment on multiple fraud charges. I didn't respond to his message. There was nothing to say. This hadn't been about ruining him. It had been about refusing to be ruined myself. I accepted the director position after negotiating both the salary and authority the role required. My first official act was to implement a system allowing anonymous reporting of financial concerns with mandatory review protocols. My second was to recommend promotions for both Theo and Veronique, who had provided crucial support during the investigation. The company announced the organizational changes at the annual all-staff meeting, where Aubrey publicly acknowledged the painful but necessary transformation Beckworth had undergone. "Sometimes the most valuable contributions come from those willing to speak uncomfortable truths," she said, inviting me to the podium. Sarah Menon turned a moment of injustice into an opportunity for institutional improvement. We're grateful she chose to fight for what's right, rather than walk away. As I stepped up to speak, I saw Luis at the back of the room, giving me a small salute. I thought of my father's words about tiny components causing the biggest failures, and how sometimes fixing those small connections can transform an entire system. 6 months ago, I was told to sign a resignation letter or never work in this industry again, I began. I signed, but not what was expected. That moment taught me something crucial. Power doesn't always lie with those who appear to hold it. Sometimes power lies in knowledge, in preparation, in the willingness to stand firm when others expect you to crumble. I looked out at the faces watching me, some I knew well, others barely at all part of the system I'd helped remake. The paper I signed that day wasn't just about my job. It was about whether we accept environments where intimidation outweighs integrity, about whether we allow fear to silence truth. Each of us makes that choice daily in ways large and small. I paused, remembering the weight of the pen in my hand that day, the clarity that had come in that moment of decision. I chose to change a single word on a document. That choice triggered a transformation none of us could have predicted. Your choices matter too, even the small ones, especially the small ones. They compound into the culture we create together. As for Finlay, the legal system delivered its own form of justice. After pleading guilty to reduced charges, He received a 3-year sentence and restitution order. His professional reputation was destroyed, not through dramatic exposure, but through the systematic documentation of his own choices. Choices he'd made believing no one was watching carefully enough to catch him. The industry conferences where he'd once commanded attention now featured his case as a cautionary example of corporate ethics failures. The same precision he'd used to manipulate systems became the tool of his undoing when those systems were properly examined. The most profound victory, however, wasn't about his downfall. It was watching Beckworth transform into the company it had always claimed to be, watching colleagues find their voices after years of silence, witnessing the power of documented truth against systemic deception. 1 year after amending that resignation letter, I received an industry leadership award for the compliance framework I'd developed. As I accepted it, I spotted a familiar face in the audience, Eleanor Pham, now heading a specialized practice focusing on workplace justice cases. "You didn't just win a case," she told me at the reception afterward. "You changed how an entire company understands accountability. That's remarkably rare." "It wasn't just me," I replied. "It was everyone who spoke up afterward, everyone who had been waiting for permission to tell the truth." She smiled, but someone had to go first. Someone had to show it was possible. That night, I called my father to tell him about the award. "You were right, Dad," I said. "The smallest components really do determine whether the whole system works or fails." "And the smallest changes," he replied, pride warming his voice, "can sometimes reset everything." If this story resonated with you, I hope you'll share your own experience in the comments below. Have you ever faced a moment where changing one small thing, one word, one decision, one action transformed your situation? Or perhaps you're facing such a moment now and gathering the courage to act. Remember, power often lies not with those who intimidate, but with those who refuse to be intimidated. Like this video if you believe in standing up for what's right, and subscribe to hear more stories of ordinary courage that leads to extraordinary change. Because sometimes, the most important signature isn't on a resignation letter, it's on the decision to trust your own worth enough to defend it. "You'll do what I say or get out," Grant screamed, his voice bouncing off the walls of the conference room. I stood my ground even as his finger jabbed the air inches from my face. "You're just a little girl who doesn't understand business. This is how things work in the real world." The conference room fell silent. 6 other executives sat frozen around the table, eyes darting between us like spectators at a car crash. Nobody moved to defend me. Nobody spoke up. "I understand business perfectly well," I replied, my voice steadier than I felt. "And I understand that what you're asking me to do is illegal. I won't falsify those safety reports." Grant's face twisted into something ugly. "Then pack your desk. You're finished here. And, are you firing me for refusing to break the law?" I asked, making sure everyone heard me clearly. His nostrils flared. "I'm firing you for insubordination, for questioning my authority in front of the team." I nodded slowly, gathering my notepad. "I'll need that in writing, please." As I walked toward the door, my heels clicking against the hardwood floor, Grant called after me. "You think you're so smart? You'll never work in this industry again. I'll make sure of it." I didn't turn around. I didn't let him see my face crumple or my hands shake. I walked straight to my office, closed the door, and finally let out the breath I'd been holding. My phone buzzed exactly 2 hours later. An unfamiliar extension. I answered professionally, as if my entire career wasn't hanging by a thread. "This is Celeste." "Celeste, this is Paul Ewing." The CEO's voice was unmistakable. "We need to talk immediately. My office. Now." I glanced through my glass wall and saw Grant walking past. Our eyes met, and I held up my phone slightly. His face went pale. I expected my job was over. What I didn't expect was that this moment would be just the beginning of the most extraordinary battle of my professional life. One that would test every ounce of my courage, intelligence, and yes, my capacity for revenge. If this story resonates with you so far, please hit like and subscribe to hear more stories about women fighting back against workplace injustice. Your support means everything, and trust me, you'll want to hear how this ends. My name is Celeste Arman, and until that day, I was the Senior Safety Compliance Director at a major construction materials company. I had spent 8 years building my reputation as meticulous, honest, and uncompromising when it came to safety standards. My team respected me, the board trusted me. Only Grant, my direct supervisor and the chief operations officer, seemed to view my dedication as an obstacle rather than an asset. I grew up in a small town where my father owned the local hardware store. He taught me to measure twice and cut once, to stand behind my work, and to never take shortcuts when safety was on the line. Buildings fall when people lie, he would say. Those principles guided my career choices and eventually led me to the corporate offices where I'd spent the last 4 years. The company had been preparing to launch a new line of flame-resistant building materials. The preliminary tests showed promising results, but not quite meeting the standards required for the rating Grant wanted to claim. The difference was small, maybe a 12% improvement in flame resistance, when regulations required 15% for the premium classification. Just adjust the numbers, Grant had instructed during our private meeting the previous day. Nobody will notice, and we can fix it in the next production run. I had refused immediately, explaining the legal and ethical problems. He seemed to accept my decision, until today's meeting, when he ambushed me in front of the executive team, presenting the falsified reports as if they were already approved, and acting shocked when I objected. As I walked to the CEO's office, my mind raced through possible outcomes. Termination seemed most likely. Paul Ewing had always struck me as fair, but Grant had been with the company for 15 years. I had only 4 years of history here. The math didn't favor me. Paul's assistant ushered me in without making eye contact. Not a good sign. Close the door, Paul said, not looking up from his computer. His office was sparse, with just a desk, 3 chairs, and a single family photo. No decorative awards or golf memorabilia like other executives favored. I sat, folded my hands, and waited. I received an interesting email about an hour ago, Paul finally said, turning his screen toward me. It appears to be a recording of your meeting with Grant this morning. And my pulse quickened. I didn't record anything. No, you didn't. He clicked play. The audio was crystal clear. Grant's voice filled the room, instructing everyone to adjust testing figures before market submission. Then my refusal. His threat. All of it. Who sent this? I asked. Anonymous email address, but the sender included copies of the original test results and Grant's altered versions. Paul leaned forward. Tell me your version. I explained everything, from the initial testing disappointments to Grant's private request to today's public confrontation. Paul listened without interruption, his expression unchanged. When I finished, he nodded once. Grant tells a different story. Says you've been difficult to work with, undermining his authority, refusing reasonable requests. My stomach tightened. Of course, Grant would spin this. Is asking me to break federal safety regulations a reasonable request? I asked. Paul almost smiled. No, it's not. He stood up. Grant is on administrative leave pending investigation. I need you to compile a complete report of the test results, including any communication about modifications. I blinked. You believe me? I believe evidence, Paul replied. And I need more of it. This stays between us for now. As I walked back to my office, relief mixed with apprehension. Grant wouldn't go down without a fight. His connections throughout the industry were extensive. Even if he was terminated, he could make good on his threat to destroy my reputation. That night, I couldn't sleep. Around 3 a.m., my phone lit up with a text from an unknown number. You have no idea what you've started. Hope it was worth it. I stared at the message, a chill settling over me. Grant wouldn't just try to ruin my career. He would try to break me completely. The next morning, I arrived early to find my office door ajar. Nothing obvious was missing, but my files looked slightly rearranged. The cleaning crew didn't touch my desk. Company policy for confidential materials. By noon, rumors were circulating. People whispered as I passed. My team seemed nervous during our status meeting. Finally, Iris, my most trusted analyst, stayed behind. People are saying you tried to falsify safety reports and blamed Grant when you got caught, she said quietly. They're saying that's why he's not here. The room seemed to tilt. Who's saying that? It came from Vince in marketing. He said he heard it directly from Grant last night. It came from Vince in marketing. Vince, Grant's golf buddy and drinking companion. Of course, that's completely backwards, I said. I can't discuss details, but please know it's not true. Iris nodded, but doubt lingered in her expression. The damage was spreading. I spent the afternoon gathering every email, report, and notation related to the testing process. My office door remained locked. At 6 p.m., Paul called me back to his office. The board is concerned, he said without preamble. Grant has friends there. They're pushing for an independent investigation. That should clear things up, I said, trying to sound confident. Paul's expression darkened. Not necessarily. Grant's been removing documents from the system. Digital footprints are disappearing. My blood ran cold. That's why someone was in my office. He's covering his tracks. Likely. But we don't know who sent the recording. Or why. Paul looked troubled. The board meets tomorrow at 9 a.m. Both you and Grant will present your versions. I started to protest, but Paul held up his hand. I know it seems unfair, but Grant's claiming whistleblower protection, saying you threatened him when he discovered your tampering. The audacity stole my breath. That's insane. It's calculated, Paul corrected. He's turning this into a, he said, she said situation. Without concrete proof, the board may choose the easier path, which is letting you both go to avoid scandal. I left Paul's office feeling like the floor had disappeared beneath me. Grant was systematically dismantling my defense before I could even build it. The recording should have been enough, but if he claimed I'd doctored it or taken his words out of context. That night, another text arrived. Board's already decided. Enjoy unemployment. I sat in my darkened apartment, possibilities spinning through my mind. If I lost this battle, Grant wouldn't just win. He'd ensure I never worked in the industry again. His influence extended too far. For the first time, a new emotion pushed through my anxiety. Rage. Pure, clarifying rage. If Grant wanted war, I would give him one. But I wouldn't fight dirty like him. I would fight smart. I opened my laptop and began to plan. Morning came too quickly. I showered, dressed in my most professional navy suit, and arrived at the office an hour before the board meeting. The building was eerily quiet except for the distant rumble of the HVAC system and occasional clicking of early arriving keyboards. I needed allies, not just for moral support, but for what I was planning. Iris arrived at 7:30, her eyes widening when she saw me waiting by her cubicle. I need to ask you something important, I said, keeping my voice low. Did you notice anything unusual about the testing process for the new materials? She hesitated, glancing around the empty office. You mean besides Grant rushing everyone? Yes. Anything about access to samples or test equipment. Understanding dawned on her face. The missing samples. 3 weeks ago, Grant said they were contaminated and removed them from the lab. This was new information. Which batch numbers? The ones that failed most significantly. B17 through B22. I nodded, adding this to my mental file. Iris, I may need your help today. If you're asked about testing protocols during my time here, will you tell the truth? Of course. She looked offended that I'd even asked. Celeste, most of us know what's happening isn't right. We just don't know how to help. Her words strengthened my resolve. Thank you. That matters more than you know. At 8:45, I walked into the boardroom with my head high. 2 security guards stood near the entrance, unusual for a board meeting. Their presence confirmed my suspicions about how Grant was positioning this confrontation. The boardroom filled gradually with directors in expensive suits, their expressions carefully neutral as they took their seats around the massive table. Paul nodded slightly when our eyes met, but offered nothing more. At precisely 9, Grant walked in, looking remarkably composed for someone under investigation. He'd chosen a charcoal suit that emphasized his athletic build, his silver-streaked hair freshly trimmed. Image was everything to Grant, and today was no exception. Let's begin, said Harriet Vale, the board chairwoman. Her voice carried natural authority despite her diminutive stature. We're here to address serious allegations concerning safety compliance protocols. Grant went first, his presentation slick and practiced. He described finding irregularities in testing data and confronting me about them. According to his version, I'd become defensive and threatened to blame him if the issues became public. He painted himself as the reluctant whistleblower, forced to act when I refused to correct my mistakes. I've always prioritized safety, he concluded solemnly, but I also understand business realities. There are proper channels for addressing testing shortfalls without compromising either safety or business objectives. Unfortunately, Ms. Armin rejected those options. Several board members nodded. My anger burned hotter, but I kept my expression neutral. When my turn came, I didn't waste time defending myself directly. Instead, I presented facts, dates, testing protocols, comparative analysis of our materials against industry standards. The data shows our new product line achieves a 12.4% improvement in flame resistance, I explained. Federal standards require 15% for the premium classification Grant wanted to claim. That seems like a small difference, one director commented. Couldn't additional testing find parameters that would achieve compliance? Absolutely, I agreed. That's exactly what I recommended. Additional development before market release, which would cost another 6 months and approximately $7 million. Grant interjected. Completely unnecessary when competitive analysis shows our 12.4% outperforms similar products already marketed with premium classification. Those products were grandfathered in under older standards, I countered. New products must meet current regulations. The technical discussion continued for nearly an hour. I could see several directors growing restless, eyes glazing over at the detailed explanations of testing methodology. This was Grant's strategy. Make it so technically complex that they default to trusting the longer-tenured executive. Harriet finally interrupted. While this technical debate is informative, it doesn't address the core issue. We have conflicting accounts of who instructed whom to falsify reports. Without clear evidence, this becomes a matter of credibility. Grant smiled slightly. He thought he'd won. I agree completely, I said, which is why I'd like to present one more piece of information. I slid a USB drive across the table to Harriet. This contains something that might clarify matters. Grant's smile faltered. What is this? Harriet asked. It's a video recording from our materials lab 3 weeks ago. It shows Mr. Reynolds removing test samples from secure storage, 1/7, specifically batches B17 through B22, which had failed to meet premium standards. The color drained from Grant's face. You can't just... The lab has security cameras, Grant, I said quietly. Always has. Paul inserted the drive into his laptop and turned the screen toward the board. The footage clearly showed Grant entering the lab after hours, removing specific sample containers and leaving with them in his briefcase. This is taken out of context, Grant sputtered. Those samples were contaminated. I was removing them for specialized testing. If that were true, I replied, there would be transfer documentation and results from the external testing facility. There aren't any. The board members exchanged glances. The momentum was shifting. Furthermore, I continued, I've prepared a timeline of all communications regarding the testing process, including emails where Mr. Reynolds instructed the team to find ways to make the numbers work, despite the initial results. Grant's composure cracked entirely. She's manipulating you all. This is a personal vendetta, because I wouldn't approve her promotion last quarter. The outburst hung in the air, his desperation evident to everyone. Harriet's gaze hardened. Mr. Reynolds, please control yourself. But Grant wasn't finished. He turned to me, eyes blazing. You think you're so clever? You have no idea who you're dealing with. I built this department. Half the people in this room owe me favors. Grant, Paul warned. That's enough. No, it's not enough. Grant stood, pointing at me. She's been planning this for months. Ask her about the mysterious recording of our meeting. She claims she didn't make it, but who else would benefit? I remained seated, maintaining my composure. I didn't record that meeting, but clearly someone in the room was concerned enough about your behavior to document it. The board deliberation that followed was brief and decisive. Grant was placed on indefinite leave pending further investigation. I was to continue my duties with direct reporting to Paul until the matter was fully resolved. As we filed out of the boardroom, Grant shouldered past me, whispering, "This isn't over. Not even close." I believed him. The next 2 weeks brought an uneasy calm. External investigators interviewed staff and reviewed records. I threw myself into work, trying to rebuild trust with my team and stabilize our department. Then the whispers started again. Clients were calling, concerned about rumors they'd heard regarding our testing protocols. Investors were asking questions. Someone was talking to people outside the company, casting doubt on our entire compliance history. Paul called me to his office on a rainy Thursday afternoon. "The damage control isn't working," he said without preamble. "Grant's calling in every favor he has. 3 board members are now suggesting we need fresh leadership in safety compliance to restore confidence." My heart sank. "They're going to let me go after all." "Not if I can help it," Paul replied. "But Grant's playing the long game. He's attacking the company itself, knowing the board will eventually decide someone has to take the fall. And between you and him, I'm the easier sacrifice." I finished. Paul didn't disagree. That evening, my home phone rang, a number I rarely gave out. Celeste? The voice was vaguely familiar. Yes? It's Donna, Grant's assistant. My guard immediately went up. What can I do for you, Donna? I need to talk to you. Not on the phone. It's about what Grant's doing. We arranged to meet at a coffee shop 20 minutes from the office. I arrived early, chose a table with a clear view of the entrance, and waited. Donna arrived looking nervous, her eyes darting around the cafe before she sat down. I shouldn't be here, she said immediately. Grant would. She stopped herself. Would what, Donna? She twisted her coffee cup in her hands. He's not just trying to get you fired anymore. He's trying to make sure you never work again. Anywhere. How? He's been calling former clients where safety issues occurred, suggesting you might have overlooked problems. She lowered her voice. He's even contacted state licensing boards with concerns about your professional conduct. The systematic destruction of my professional reputation was underway, just as he'd promised. Why are you telling me this? I asked. Donna hesitated. Because I've worked for Grant for 7 years. This isn't the first time he's done something like this, but it's the first time I've seen someone fight back effectively. She reached into her purse and slid a small notebook across the table. These are the people he's contacted, and the things he's telling them. I flipped through pages of meticulously noted names, companies, and talking points. You kept records of this? She nodded. Grant dictates everything. I've been writing it all down for years, just in case. In case of what? In case someone finally stood up to him. Her eyes met mine. He ruins people, Celeste. Not just careers, lives. As I drove home, the notebook beside me felt both dangerous and precious. Donna had given me ammunition, but using it would mean escalating this fight beyond the boardroom, beyond professional disagreement into personal destruction. Was I ready for that? Could I match Grant's ruthlessness without becoming like him? My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Board votes tomorrow. Hope you weren't planning on any job interviews next week or next year. Grant was still one step ahead, still confident in his victory. I pulled into my driveway and sat there, engine off, rain pattering on the roof. Through my windshield, I could see lights on in my house, lights I hadn't left on when I departed that morning. Someone was inside my home. I sat frozen, staring at my illuminated living room windows. The house had definitely been dark when I left that morning. I remembered double-checking the lights as part of my daily routine. My first instinct was to call the police, but something held me back. If this was Grant's doing, involving authorities might escalate things unpredictably. Rain drummed harder on the car roof as I weighed my options. Leave? Confront? I reached for my phone just as my front door opened, casting a rectangle of light onto my porch. A man stepped out. Not Grant, but someone I'd never seen before. He was thin, professional-looking, wearing a dark windbreaker. He pulled the door closed behind him, tested the knob to ensure it was locked, then walked calmly to a sedan parked across the street. I slid down in my seat, heart pounding as he drove away. Only when his taillights disappeared around the corner did I dare move. With trembling hands, I called Iris. Can you come over? Right now, I need a witness, I said when she answered. What's happening? Alarm filled her voice. Someone was in my house. Just bring your phone with a camera, please. 20 minutes later, Iris stood beside me on my porch as I unlocked my front door. We stepped inside cautiously. Nothing looked obviously disturbed at first glance. No ransacked drawers or overturned furniture. But as we moved deeper into the house, subtle wrongness emerged. My laptop was closed. I always left it open. A cabinet door in the kitchen stood slightly ajar. The throw pillows on my couch had been rearranged. Someone definitely searched this place, Iris said, voice barely above a whisper. We found the first camera in my bedroom, nestled between books on a shelf, a tiny lens barely visible. The second was under my kitchen table, disguised as a power outlet. The third, most disturbing of all, was pointed directly at my shower. This is illegal, Iris said, photographing each device without touching them. Like, seriously criminal. It's also exactly what Grant would do, I replied, a strange calm settling over me. He wants to watch me panic, wants to gather anything he can use against me. We found 5 cameras in total. I left them in place. Aren't you going to remove them? Iris asked, incredulous. I shook my head. Not yet. If I take them out, he'll know I found them. I need time to think. That night, I slept on Iris's couch, my mind racing with implications and possibilities. Grant had escalated beyond professional sabotage to personal invasion. The board vote loomed tomorrow. My options were diminishing by the hour. Morning brought clarity and resolve. I showered and dressed at Iris's apartment, then drove to the office for what might be my last day. In my purse sat Donna's notebook for my nuclear option. The corridors felt charged with tension as I walked to my office. People watched me pass, their expressions a mixture of pity and curiosity. News of the board vote had clearly spread. Paul met me at my door. Board meeting's been moved up. 9 o'clock. I checked my watch. 8:37. That's not much notice. It wasn't my decision, he said grimly. Grant's been busy. I know exactly how busy he's been, I replied, thinking of the cameras hidden throughout my home. The boardroom was already full when we arrived. Grant sat near Harriet, their heads bent together in conversation. He looked up as I entered, his smile cold and triumphant. Celeste, Harriet began once everyone was seated. I'll be direct. Concerns have been raised about your judgment and the department's integrity under your leadership. The board feels a change may be necessary to restore client confidence. What specific concerns? I asked, already knowing the answer. Multiple clients have contacted us regarding past safety certifications. They're questioning whether proper protocols were followed. Harriet slid a folder toward me. These incidents occurred under your supervision. I opened the folder to find a list of projects, all ones where Grant had overridden my recommendations but kept my signature on the final approvals. I see, I said quietly, closing the folder. And what does Grant say about these projects? Grant straightened. I've simply shared my concerns that oversight may have been inadequate during critical certifications. Interesting. I placed my hands flat on the table. Before we continue, I'd like to address the board about a related matter. Harriet frowned. We have a tight agenda today, Celeste. This will only take a moment, I insisted, and it's directly relevant to these allegations. She nodded reluctantly. I took a deep breath. Last night, someone broke into my home and installed hidden surveillance cameras throughout my house, including my bedroom and bathroom. I have documented and photographed these devices with a witness present. The room fell silent. Grant's expression didn't change, but I noticed his fingers tighten around his pen. That's terrible, Harriet said, looking genuinely shocked. Have you contacted the police? Not yet. I wanted to address this with the board first, because I believe it's connected to our current situation. Connected how? One of the directors asked. The timing is suspicious. Coming the night before this vote, someone wants to gather compromising information about me or intimidate me into resignation before today's meeting. All eyes briefly flicked toward Grant, who scoffed. That's an outrageous insinuation. I had nothing to do with any break-in. I haven't accused anyone specifically, I replied calmly. I'm simply making the board aware of escalating attempts to undermine my position and personal safety. Harriet looked troubled. While concerning, this alleged break-in doesn't address the client complaints before us. Actually, it does. I pulled Donna's notebook from my purse. I've received information about a coordinated campaign to contact clients and regulatory agencies with manufactured concerns about my work. This notebook contains detailed records of those communications. Grant's face darkened. What notebook? Let me see that. I handed it directly to Harriet instead. You'll find dates, names, and talking points designed to create exactly the kind of doubt we're discussing today. As Harriet flipped through the pages, Grant's composure began to crack. That's Donna's handwriting. She's been working against me. This is completely fabricated. Is it? I asked. The projects listed in your complaint folder match exactly with the ones mentioned in these notes. Projects where you overrode my safety concerns but kept my signature on the approvals. The board members exchanged uncomfortable glances. This is getting out of hand, Harriet declared. We need to— There's one more thing, I interrupted, my heart racing. The surveillance cameras in my home, I didn't remove them. They're still transmitting. To whom, I wonder? I pulled out my phone and opened an app. This signal detector identifies wireless transmissions. Would anyone object if I use it right now in this room? Grant stood abruptly. This is absurd. I don't have to sit here and be subjected to this witch hunt. No one has accused you of anything yet, Grant, Paul said mildly. Why are you so defensive? I activated the app and slowly walked around the table. The signal strength remained steady until I approached Grant's position. The app's reading spiked dramatically. Interesting, I said, turning my phone so others could see the display. The signal is strongest right here. This proves nothing, Grant snarled, but sweat had appeared on his forehead. May I? Paul asked, extending his hand toward Grant's suit jacket pocket. You have no right, Grant began, but Paul had already reached in and pulled out a small receiver. The silence that followed was deafening. I've never seen that before, Grant insisted, his voice rising. Someone planted that on me. Harriet's expression had transformed from skepticism to disgust. Mr. Reynolds, I think you should leave this meeting. Security will escort you from the building. The board will contact you after we've discussed this situation. Grant looked around the table, finding no allies in the faces staring back at him. This isn't over, he hissed at me as security arrived. You have no idea what I'm capable of. Actually, I replied quietly, I think I do. After Grant's departure, the meeting continued for another hour. The board decided to suspend judgment on my position pending a full investigation into Grant's actions. It wasn't a complete victory, but it was a reprieve. As the room emptied, Paul stayed behind with me. That was either incredibly brave or incredibly foolish, he said. Sometimes those are the same thing, I replied. He shook his head. Grant won't stop. You've humiliated him now. He'll come at you harder. I'm counting on it. The immediate threat had passed, but as I walked back to my office, I knew this was merely the beginning of the real battle. Grant had resources, connections, and now a personal vendetta. My evidence had bought me time, nothing more. 3 days passed without incident. The security team removed the cameras from my home. Donna was placed on administrative leave for her own protection. External investigators began examining the projects Grant had flagged. I was working late when my office phone rang. Hello? You think you've won? Grant's voice slithered through the line. Check your email. The call disconnected. I opened my inbox with trembling fingers to find a message from an anonymous address. The subject line read simply, Your father. In quote, the email contained a single image, a father's hardware store, with a bright red foreclosure notice plastered across the front window. My father called 10 minutes later, his voice uncharacteristically shaky. Someone bought my business loan from the bank, Celeste. They're calling it due immediately. 30 years in business, and they're giving me 48 hours to pay or get out. Ice filled my veins. How much? 320,000. I don't have it, sweetheart. Not even close. Grant had found my vulnerability. Not my career, not my reputation, but my family. I drove home in a daze, possibilities and dead ends cycling through my mind. I had savings, but nowhere near enough. No bank would approve a loan that quickly. Grant had calculated perfectly. He'd found an attack I couldn't defend against. When I pulled into my driveway, a familiar car was waiting. Donna sat behind the wheel, her face pale in the darkness. He's going after your father, she said as I approached. I know. This is what he does, Celeste. Finds what matters most and takes it away. He did it to me 3 years ago with my brother's business. I stared at her. Why are you telling me this? Because I want to help you stop him. For good. She handed me a thumb drive. Everything's on here. Everything he's done. Not just at the company. Private accounts. Recordings of meetings with clients. His real estate holdings under different names. I took the drive. Its weight insignificant compared to what it represented. Why didn't you use this yourself? Donna smiled sadly. I was afraid. Still am. But he's never been this exposed before. You've already done what no one else could. Make the board question him. With this. She gestured at the drive. You can finish it. He's foreclosing on my father's store in 48 hours. Then you don't have much time. She started her car. Be careful, Celeste. And be thorough. If you strike and don't take him down completely, there won't be a second chance. As Donna drove away, I stood in my driveway, clutching the thumb drive. Grant had pushed me into a corner, forcing me to choose between surrender and all-out war. I plugged the drive into my laptop and began reading. Hours passed as I absorbed the extent of Grant's corruption, falsified reports going back years, kickbacks from contractors, blackmail of inspectors. The pattern was clear and damning. But one file stood out from the others, a folder labeled Insurance. Inside were details of an offshore account containing millions, along with provisional paperwork for a home purchase in a non-extradition country. Grant had an escape plan. He'd always had an escape plan. By dawn, I knew what I had to do, not just to save my father's store, but to ensure Grant could never hurt anyone again. It would require perfect timing, unflinching nerve, and a willingness to risk everything. I made 3 phone calls, sent 7 emails, and booked a flight. Then I drove to my father's store, arriving just as he was unlocking the front door. His shoulders slumped with defeat, his normally cheerful face drawn with worry. "I've been trying to call the loan company," he said as I approached. "No one answers. Just voicemail. They won't answer," I told him. "This isn't about money. It's about hurting me." His expression shifted from confusion to anger. "Your boss? The one who tried to get you fired?" I nodded. "He's escalating, using you to get to me." My father's weathered hands clenched into fists. "I'll go bankrupt before I let someone use my business to hurt my daughter." "It won't come to that," I promised, though I wasn't entirely sure I could keep that promise. "I have a plan." "What kind of plan?" I hesitated, choosing my words carefully. "The less you know right now, the better. But I need you to trust me. Can you do that?" He studied my face for a long moment. "Always have." As I drove away from my childhood home, possibly for the last time, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Tick-tock, 36 hours left. "Ready to beg yet?" I didn't respond. Grant wanted me desperate, pleading, broken. He wanted to savor my defeat. Instead, I was coldly, perfectly focused on what needed to happen next. My flight departed in 3 hours. I had just enough time to set everything in motion. The airport terminal buzzed with early morning travelers, but I barely registered them as I moved toward my gate. My carry-on contained only essentials, a change of clothes, my laptop, and Donna's thumb drive safely tucked into an inner pocket. My checked bag held everything else I might need for what was coming. My destination, Grand Cayman. My target, Whale Crest Holdings, the shell company Grant had established to hold his insurance policy funds. As I boarded my flight, my phone buzzed with a text from Paul. "Board emergency meeting scheduled for tomorrow. Grant demanding reinstatement and your termination. Be careful." I powered off my phone as the flight attendant approached. For the next few hours, I would be unreachable. A terrifying but necessary silence while Grant continued his assault on my family's livelihood. The flight gave me time to review the documents Donna had provided. Grant had meticulously built his escape route over years, siphoning funds from various projects into offshore accounts under layers of corporate entities. The money trail was complex, but not impossible to follow if you knew where to look. And thanks to Donna, I knew exactly where to look. Grand Cayman greeted me with sweltering heat and blinding sunshine. I took a taxi directly to the financial district, a collection of gleaming buildings housing hundreds of shell companies and hidden fortunes. Grant's particular bank occupied a modest building with heavy security and discreet signage. The receptionist smiled professionally as I approached. "How may I help you today?" "I have an appointment with Mr. Neville," I said, using the name Donna had provided, "regarding Whale Crest Holdings." Her smile didn't waver, but her eyes sharpened with interest. "And your name?" "Marion Reynolds," I replied, using Grant's wife's first name and his surname. According to Donna's files, this was the authorized identity Grant had established for emergency access. "One moment, please." 5 minutes later, I was escorted to a private office where a thin man with a crisp British accent greeted me. "Mrs. Reynolds, a pleasure. We don't often see our clients in person." He gestured to a chair. "How may we assist you today?" "I need to execute the contingency protocol," I said, using the exact phrasing from Grant's documents. Mr. Neville's expression remained neutral, but his posture stiffened slightly. "I see. That's quite serious. May I ask what's prompted this?" "My husband is facing imminent legal troubles. We need to secure the assets immediately." He nodded. "Of course. I'll need to verify your identity and authorization codes." This was the moment of truth. Donna had provided what she believed were the correct codes, but if she was wrong, or if Grant had changed them, my plan would collapse before it began. I recited the alphanumeric sequence from memory. Mr. Neville typed it into his computer, his eyes scanning the screen. "Everything appears to be in order, Mrs. Reynolds." He smiled thinly. "How would you like to proceed with the funds?" Relief flooded through me, but I kept my expression businesslike. "I'll need 2 transfers. First, $325,000 to this account." I slid a paper with my father's business account information across the desk. "The remainder should go here." I provided the second account number, a special escrow account I had established through Paul's lawyer. Mr. Neville raised an eyebrow at the second account. "That's quite unusual. This appears to be an escrow account." "Yes, for security." He hesitated, then nodded. "As you wish. The transfers will be complete within the hour. Will you be waiting? I'll return this afternoon for confirmation, I replied, rising from my chair. Thank you for your assistance. Back on the street, I finally allowed myself a moment of trembling relief. Phase 1 complete. Grant's insurance policy, nearly $4 million, was now beyond his reach. The money to save my father's store was on its way, but the most dangerous part of my plan still lay ahead. I checked into my hotel, showered, and changed clothes. My phone, when I turned it back on, exploded with notifications. 3 missed calls from my father, 5 from Paul. A text from an unknown number, 24 hours left. Hope Daddy likes unemployment. I called my father first. The bank just called, he said without preamble. The loan's been satisfied, paid in full. What did you do? I found a way to make things right, I said, choosing my words carefully. Are you okay? I'm fine, but I'm worried about you. Where are you? I can't say right now, but I'll be home soon, I promise. Next, I called Paul. Grant's gone ballistic, he said immediately. He's calling everyone on the board, making wild accusations about you stealing company funds. What's happening, Celeste? I'm handling it, I replied, but I need you to do something for me. Is the meeting still on for tomorrow? Yes, 9 a.m. Make sure everyone's there, and have security ready. Ready for what? Everything. My final call was to Iris. Is it ready? I asked. All set up, just like you asked. But Celeste, this is crazy. If it backfires, it won't, I said with more confidence than I felt. Just make sure the timing is perfect. After a restless night, I returned to the bank the following morning. Mr. Neville confirmed both transfers had been completed successfully. I thanked him and left, boarding my return flight with just hours to spare before the board meeting. Landing back home with barely enough time, I rushed directly to the office. Dawn was just breaking as I entered the building, the security guard raising his eyebrows at my early arrival. Big day? He asked. The biggest, I replied. In my office, I found Iris waiting with my laptop already connected to the boardroom's presentation system. Everything's loaded, she said nervously. The video feed is ready to go. Are you sure about this? Absolutely sure. I checked my watch. Grant will be here in about 30 minutes. I need to get changed. From my checked bag, I pulled a garment bag containing a suit identical to the one I'd worn the day Grant had called me a little girl in front of the executive team. A calculated psychological trigger. At 8:45, I took my position in the boardroom, sitting calmly at the table as board members began to filter in. Paul arrived early, his questioning look met with my reassuring nod. At 8:57, Grant strode in, flanked by a man I recognized as a high-powered attorney from a prestigious firm. Grant barely glanced my way, his attention focused on Harriet as she called the meeting to order. We're here to address serious allegations from both Mr. Reynolds and Miss Arman, Harriet began. In the interest of fairness, we'll hear from both parties before making any decisions. Grant's attorney spoke first, his voice smooth and practiced. My client has been the victim of a coordinated campaign to discredit him professionally. The evidence presented at the previous meeting was fabricated by a disgruntled assistant. Furthermore, we have reason to believe Ms. Arman has engaged in financial impropriety, possibly even embezzlement. Several board members shifted uncomfortably. That's a serious accusation, Harriet noted. Do you have evidence? We're gathering it now, the attorney replied. But the timing of Ms. Arman's sudden disappearance yesterday is certainly suspicious. All eyes turned to me. Ms. Arman, Harriet said, would you like to respond? I would. I stood slowly, moving to the presentation console. But first, I'd like to ask Mr. Reynolds a direct question. Grant's eyes narrowed suspiciously. How's your insurance policy doing today? I asked quietly. The color drained from Grant's face. His attorney looked confused. I don't know what you're talking about, Grant said, but his voice lacked conviction. Really? Whalecrest Holdings doesn't ring a bell? The $4 million you've been hiding offshore doesn't seem familiar? The attorney leaned toward Grant, whispering urgently. Grant waved him off. These are baseless accusations, Grant snapped. You're trying to distract from your own misconduct. Am I? I pressed a button on the console, and the boardroom screen illuminated with banking documents. These are records from your Cayman Islands account. The account you've been funneling company funds into for years as your personal escape plan. The board members leaned forward, examining the documents with growing alarm. This is preposterous, Grant's attorney interjected. These documents could easily be falsified. They could be, I agreed. except that yesterday I flew to Grand Cayman and withdrew every cent from that account. The room fell silent, Grant's face contorted with a mixture of disbelief and rage. That's impossible, he whispered. You couldn't have accessed your emergency protocol? Used your wife's name and your authorization codes? The same codes you keep in your personal safe, which Donna photographed months ago as her own insurance policy against you? Grant lunged to his feet. You stole my money! Actually, I recovered stolen money, I corrected him. Money you embezzled from this company over years, and I didn't keep it. I changed the display to show the escrow account. It's all here, in an account controlled by the company's outside counsel, minus the amount you used to try to destroy my father's business. The attorney was frantically gathering his papers. This meeting is over. My client has nothing further to say without Without what? I interrupted. Without explaining the illegal surveillance equipment he planted in my home? Without addressing the forged safety reports in his desk drawer? Or maybe without discussing the blackmail he's been using against building inspectors for the past 5 years? I clicked to the next slide, a video feed showing Grant's home office. On his desk sat an open laptop, its screen clearly visible. Right now, federal investigators are executing a search warrant at your home, I said calmly. Based on evidence I provided yesterday regarding safety fraud and corporate embezzlement, they should be finding your private records right about now. On cue, agents appeared in the video feed, entering Grant's office with boxes and evidence bags. Grant's composure shattered completely. You little... He lunged toward me, only to be intercepted by security guards, who had quietly entered the room during my presentation. I've spent the past 48 hours cooperating with federal authorities, I explained to the stunned board members as Grant struggled against the guards, providing documentation of years of safety violations, financial fraud, and witness intimidation. The company itself isn't implicated, neither yet, but could face significant liability if it doesn't demonstrate immediate and thorough cooperation. Harriet found her voice first. You should have come to the board with this information. Would you have believed me? I asked simply. Or would you have sided with the executive who's been here 15 years longer than me? The one with friends throughout this room? No one answered. Grant, I said, turning to face him directly. You called me a little girl who doesn't understand business. You threatened my career, invaded my home, and attacked my family. You thought I would either surrender or fight you on your terms. I smiled thinly. I chose differently. The next few hours passed in a blur of statements, legal discussions, and emergency damage control. Grant was escorted from the building in handcuffs, his attorney trailing helplessly behind. The board entered emergency session to discuss the company's response to the federal investigation. Paul found me in my office late that afternoon. The board wants to see you, he said. To fire me? I asked, surprisingly calm at the prospect. To offer you Grant's position, with conditions, of course. Full cooperation with authorities. Complete transparency moving forward. I nodded slowly. I can live with that. What you did was incredibly risky, Paul said. If any part of your plan had failed, it didn't fail because Grant never imagined I could beat him at his own game. He saw me as a threat to neutralize, not an opponent to respect. I closed my laptop. That was his mistake. 3 months later, I stood in my father's hardware store, helping him arrange a new display of power tools. The business was thriving. The foreclosure threat had actually generated local support and new customers. Still can't believe how it all turned out, my father said, adjusting a drill on the shelf. That man tried to take everything from us and lost everything himself instead, I finished. Grant had pleaded guilty to multiple federal charges to avoid a longer sentence. The company had survived the scandal with minimal damage, thanks to our full cooperation with investigators. And I had stepped into a leadership role I never anticipated, working to rebuild a culture of genuine safety compliance. My phone buzzed with a text from Iris. Turn on Channel 7. I grabbed the remote for the small TV in my father's office and switched to the local news. A reporter stood outside the federal courthouse. Former executive Grant Reynolds was sentenced today to 7 years in federal prison for fraud, embezzlement, and witness intimidation. Reynolds, once considered an industry leader, was brought down by evidence provided by his former subordinate, who exposed a years-long pattern of safety violations and financial crimes. My father squeezed my shoulder. You did good, kiddo. I nodded, a complicated mix of emotions washing over me. Not triumph or glee, but something quieter, the satisfaction of justice served, of standing my ground when it mattered most. That night, I sat on my porch watching the sunset, reflecting on everything that had happened. The cameras were long gone from my home. Grant's threats were silenced. My career was secure, stronger, even, than before. Yet something had fundamentally changed within me. I had discovered capacities I never knew I possessed, for strategy, for calculated risk, for the kind of resolute courage that doesn't waver even when everything is at stake. I had also learned that sometimes, the only way to defeat a bully is to be smarter, more patient, and more strategic than they ever expected you could be. Not by becoming like them, but by using their own tactics against them while maintaining your principles. If you've ever faced someone who underestimated you, who dismissed you as just a little girl or not understanding their world, I hope this story reminds you that sometimes the most powerful response isn't an immediate reaction, but a carefully planned checkmate they never see coming. Like, comment, and subscribe if you want to hear more stories about standing up to workplace bullies and the sweet satisfaction of professional justice. Have you ever been underestimated at work? Share your experience in the comments below. Your story matters. And who knows? Maybe your strategy will help someone else facing their own Grant Reynolds. We need to discuss your inappropriate comment about the regional director during yesterday's conference call, said Iris, our human resources manager. Her voice had that practiced neutrality that actually conveyed deep disapproval. I stared at her, genuinely confused. What comment? I barely spoke during that call. She slid a printed transcript across the table. Someone had highlighted words in neon yellow, crude, sexually explicit language about Director Preston's physical appearance that made my skin crawl just reading it. This wasn't me, I said, my voice rising despite my attempt to stay calm. I would never say something like this. 3 people independently reported hearing you say these exact words during the 3-minute technical difficulty when the video dropped but audio continued, Iris replied, tapping a perfectly manicured nail against the paper. That's fairly conclusive, Piper. My heart hammered against my ribs. Check the recording again. The recording had that audio segment corrupted, unfortunately, Iris interrupted. But we have 3 senior staff members with identical accounts. I recognized what was happening with crystal clarity. 3 senior staff members, all loyal to my supervisor. The same supervisor who'd been systematically undermining me since I'd challenged her on the regulatory compliance issues with our Asia expansion. The door swung open without a knock. Evan Reiner, CEO and founder, stepped in. His unexpected presence sent Iris jolting upright in her chair, smoothing her already immaculate blazer. Sir, we're in the middle of a disciplinary. Actually, he said, his voice quiet but filling the room completely. We need to talk about something else entirely. Iris's face drained of color so rapidly I thought she might faint. Her hand trembled as she withdrew the transcript from my side of the table. Miss Chaudhry has been working directly with my office for the past month, he continued, taking the chair beside me, rather than behind the desk where executives typically sat. On my explicit instructions, I kept my expression neutral, though inside my mind raced. I had done no such thing. I'm not sure I understand, Iris said, her voice barely audible. You will, he replied, then turned to me. Piper, would you mind waiting outside for a moment? As I stood to leave, he added, and please call Lane in legal. Tell him it's time for what we discussed. I stepped into the hallway, the door clicking shut behind me. Through the frosted glass, I could see their silhouettes. Evan leaning forward, Iris shrinking back in her chair. Whatever was happening, it certainly wasn't what I'd expected when I'd received the ominous HR summons this morning. My hands shook as I pulled out my phone. I had no idea who Lane was, or what call I was supposed to make. But something extraordinary was unfolding, and somehow, impossibly, the CEO was intervening on my behalf. Wait, were you as surprised as I was by that unexpected entrance? If you're enjoying this story of workplace revenge, take a second to hit like and subscribe. The truth behind what happens next will completely change how you view office politics forever. My name is Piper Chaudhry, and until 3 months ago, I was a mid-level project manager who kept her head down and did her work. Not particularly ambitious, not particularly noteworthy, just competent, reliable. The kind of employee who gets solid performance reviews but is never quite remarkable enough to fast-track for promotion. That changed when I was unexpectedly tapped to lead our company's expansion into Asian markets. The announcement shocked everyone, especially Thora, my immediate supervisor, who had been lobbying aggressively for her friend Willa to get the position instead. Piper's innovative approach to the European regulatory challenges impressed the board. Our division head had explained during the announcement. We believe she'll bring that same creative problem, solving to the complexities of the Asian markets. I still remember Thora's expression, a tight smile that suggested she was experiencing a minor dental procedure rather than congratulating her subordinate. Innovative wasn't the word she used later when she cornered me in the break room. Listen carefully, she said, stirring her tea with unnecessary vigor. You've been with us, what, 6 years? I've invested 15 years in this company. This project is too important for experiments with unproven talent. I understand your concerns, I said, trying to sound confident despite the knot forming in my stomach. But I've already started research on the regulatory landscape. And I think, research, she echoed with a dismissive laugh. Darling, business in Asia isn't about researching regulations. It's about relationships. Relationships that Willa and I have cultivated for years while you were managing supply chains in Detroit. That conversation set the tone for what followed. Every meeting became a minefield. Every email, a potential trap. Thora's tight circle of allies, including Willa, Devon, and Kenzie, closed ranks, excluding me from crucial conversations and withholding information I needed to do my job. Despite this, I threw myself into learning everything about the markets we were targeting. I spent nights researching regulatory requirements, consumer preferences, and competitive landscapes. And what I discovered alarmed me deeply. Our product line, a revolutionary type of flame-retardant building material, would fail crucial safety regulations in 3 major Asian countries. The modifications required would delay our launch by 8 months minimum and require significant redesign. When I brought these findings to Thora with carefully prepared documentation, she dismissed them immediately. Those regulations are flexible, she said, barely glancing at my research. Continue as planned. Something in her casual dismissal triggered warning bells. This wasn't about office politics anymore. It was about potentially dangerous products entering markets where they wouldn't meet safety standards. I tried a different approach, scheduling a private meeting with Devon, Thora's second-in-command, hoping he might see reason. Look, he said, lowering his voice in the conference room. Everyone knows those requirements are just starting points for negotiation. We have local partners who handle these things. But the lab tests clearly show our materials would fail inspection. I insisted. Devon's expression hardened. Piper, some friendly advice? Know when to follow directions. Thora has connections you couldn't imagine. Don't make yourself a problem she needs to solve. That night, I found a note tucked under my windshield wiper in the parking garage. Plain white paper, plain black type. Some careers end before they begin. Know when to keep quiet. I sat in my car for nearly an hour, the paper trembling in my hands, wondering what I'd stumbled into and who I could possibly trust. The threatening note was my breaking point. That night, I called my younger sister Zoe, the only person I trusted completely with this situation. You need to document everything, she said immediately. Record conversations if it's legal in your state. Save emails. Take photos of anything suspicious. And then what? I asked, pacing my small apartment kitchen. Go to HR? They're all buddies with Thora. Maybe not HR, Zoe said thoughtfully. Maybe aim higher. Following her advice, I began keeping meticulous notes. I recorded meetings when possible. I saved emails showing how information was being deliberately withheld. I compiled the regulatory research that was being ignored. And I watched. I observed how Thora operated. The way she cultivated relationships with certain executives while subtly undermining others. The way information flowed in her circle, always controlled, always serving her narrative. 2 weeks after finding the note, came the conference call that would change everything. Our regional director, Preston, had flown in from Singapore specifically to discuss timeline concerns with the expansion. 20 of us gathered in the main conference room, with another dozen joining virtually. Thora controlled the presentation with her usual polished confidence, clicking through slides that painted a picture of perfect progress. And now, she said, Piper will update us on the regulatory approval process. My stomach tightened as she smiled at me, gesturing toward the screen. This was the first I'd heard about presenting anything. She had deliberately blindsided me. I stood keenly aware of every eye in the room. Thank you, Thora. While I haven't prepared formal slides, I can share that my research into regulatory requirements in our target markets has identified significant challenges we need to address before proceeding. Preston leaned forward, his brow furrowing. What kind of challenges? Before I could answer, the video feed cut out. The large screen went black, though the audio connection remained active. Technical difficulties, Thora announced smoothly. While it addresses this, let me respond to Preston's question. The regulatory landscape is indeed complex, but we've accounted for all requirements in our timeline. All compliance benchmarks are being met ahead of schedule. This was an outright lie. I opened my mouth to object when Preston's voice came through the speakers, specifically regarding the flame spread rating requirements in Taiwan, South Korea, and Japan. Are we meeting those standards with our current formulation? A heavy silence fell over the room. Even Thora hesitated. I can answer that, I said clearly. Our current product formulation does not meet those standards. The test results I've received indicate we would need significant modifications to— I'm sorry, Thora interrupted, her voice sharp despite her smile. Piper is mistaken. The results she's referring to were preliminary and have since been superseded by more comprehensive testing. Everything is proceeding as planned. The video feed suddenly returned. Preston's face appeared on screen, looking unconvinced. I'd like to see both sets of test results, he said. Of course, Thora replied smoothly. We'll send everything over today. When the call ended, Thora cornered me by the water cooler, her voice low but intense. What exactly do you think you're doing? My job, I replied, matching her quiet tone. Those test results haven't been superseded, and you know it. Something flickered in her eyes. Not anger, but calculation. Piper, you're new to this level of business. Sometimes optimistic projections are necessary to maintain momentum. The details get sorted along the way. These aren't details. They're safety regulations that exist for a reason. She placed a hand on my arm, her grip surprisingly strong. You need to decide whether you want to be part of this team's success. Not everyone is cut out for leadership. That night, my partner Andy found me surrounded by printouts at our dining table, frantically searching for anything I might have missed. You look terrible, she said, setting down her bag. When did you last eat? I shrugged, pushing hair from my face. I think they're going to fire me. Andy pulled up a chair. Then let them. Find somewhere that values your integrity. It's not that simple, I said, showing her the email I'd just received, a calendar invitation for a meeting with HR the following week. Subject line, performance concerns. Actually, it is that simple, Andy insisted. Resign before they can fire you. Your mental health is worth more than this job. Twice over the next few days, I drafted resignation letters. Twice I deleted them. Something kept me from walking away, a stubborn belief that truth should matter, that companies shouldn't risk public safety for profit margins. Instead of resigning, I did something riskier. I began searching for what Thora and her team might be hiding. Under the guise of preparing market analysis, I requested access to product development files normally outside my purview. Most requests were denied, but enough were granted that I began piecing together a disturbing picture. 3 days before my HR meeting, I found it, hidden in a subfolder of budget projections, a spreadsheet that made my blood run cold. It wasn't just about ignoring regulations. They had actively designed a cheaper, non-compliant version of our product specifically for Asian markets. The spreadsheet included calculations of how many consumer complaints, injuries, and even potential deaths the company could absorb before regulatory action would trigger financial consequences exceeding the profit from cutting corners. Human lives reduced to cost-benefit analysis. I printed the file, then immediately deleted it from my downloads folder. That night, I didn't sleep. By morning, I had made my decision. The HR meeting arrived. As Iris slid the transcript of my supposed inappropriate comments across the table, I recognized the trap for what it was, Thora's insurance policy. If I became a problem, I'd be terminated for harassment, my credibility destroyed before I could expose anything. Then the CEO walked in, changing everything with his unexpected intervention. Now, standing in the hallway outside the HR office, I still had no idea what to do about his instruction to call someone named Lane. I scrolled through my contacts frantically, finding no one by that name. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Miss Chaudhry? This is Lane Perkins from Legal. The CEO asked me to contact you. Please meet me in conference room E immediately. When I arrived at the small conference room tucked away on the executive floor, a tall woman with close-cropped silver hair stood examining a stack of documents. Lane Perkins, she said, extending her hand. I understand you've uncovered something significant about our Asian market expansion. I'm sorry, but I'm confused, I admitted. I haven't spoken to the CEO about any of this. Lane smiled slightly. No, but someone else has. Someone who's been watching the situation unfold with great concern. The door opened, and in walked Melissa from accounting, a quiet woman I'd exchanged maybe 10 words with in 6 years. Sorry I'm late, she said, setting down a thick folder. I had to wait until Thora left for lunch to access the remaining files. I stared at her in bewilderment. You're involved in this? Melissa has been our internal auditor for compliance issues for 8 years, Lane explained. She reports directly to the board of directors, not to management. And I've been monitoring Thora's team since irregularities appeared in the safety testing budget 3 months ago, Melissa added. When you were appointed to lead the expansion, I hoped you'd notice what was happening. But why not stop them sooner? I asked. Lane's expression hardened. Evidence. We needed irrefutable proof of intentional wrongdoing, not just negligence. When you found that risk assessment spreadsheet, it was the final piece we needed. My mind reeled. How did you know I found it? We've been monitoring all access to those files, Melissa said simply. When you opened that document at 11:42 p.m. and spent 18 minutes on it before printing, we knew you'd found it. Lane handed me a document. This is a whistleblower protection agreement. By signing, you'll receive immunity from any potential liability, plus a guarantee of continued employment with the company, regardless of the outcome of our investigation. As I scanned the document, a terrible thought struck me. Thora has allies throughout the company. Even with this protection, my work life will become impossible. Perhaps, Lane acknowledged. Or perhaps not. The board has authorized a complete restructuring of the product development division, pending the results of our investigation. I signed the agreement, my signature shaky but determined. What happens now? I asked. Lane checked her watch. Right now, Thora is being informed that her team's presentation to the board this afternoon has been moved up by 30 minutes. She won't have time to properly prepare, and I assume I'll be called in to contradict her claims? Melissa and Lane exchanged glances. Actually, Lane said, we had something different in mind, something that will leave no room for denial or escape. As she outlined their plan, a mixture of dread and vindication washed over me. The trap had been meticulously designed, but not for me as I'd feared. For Thora, the question was, would it work, or would her network of influence once again shield her from consequences? 3 hours later, I stood in the back of the boardroom, watching Thora confidently stride to the podium, unaware that everything was about to change. Thora glided to the front of the boardroom with the easy confidence of someone who'd navigated corporate politics for 15 years. Her cream suit was impeccable, her presentation materials arranged with military precision on the gleaming table. Thank you all for accommodating the schedule change, she said, smiling at the 12 board members seated around the massive table. I know everyone's time is valuable. From my position against the back wall, I watched as she connected her laptop to the projector with practiced ease. I felt almost sorry for her. Almost. Before we begin, interrupted Graham, the board chairman, I'd like to note some additional attendees joining us today. Thora's smile flickered briefly as she noticed the 3 unfamiliar faces at the far end of the table. Allow me to introduce Mr. Tanaka from the Japanese Regulatory Commission, Ms. Chen from Taiwan's Building Materials Safety Board, and Mr. Park from South Korea's Consumer Protection Agency, Graham continued. They've taken time from their busy schedules to discuss our Asian market entry strategy. The color drained from Thora's face so gradually that only someone watching for it would notice. But she recovered quickly, nodding respectfully toward the regulators. What a wonderful surprise, she said, her voice steady despite the slight tremor in her hands. Their insights will be invaluable as we discuss our fully compliant product line. Mr. Tanaka smiled politely. We look forward to hearing about your safety protocols. Thora launched into her presentation, clicking through slides that showcased optimistic projections and glossy marketing concepts. I had to admire her composure. Even knowing what we knew, she projected absolute certainty. As you can see, she said, gesturing to a graph of ascending revenue lines, our projections indicate a 30% market penetration within 18 months, with minimal adaptation costs. Excuse me, miss. Chen interrupted, adjusting her glasses. These projections assume immediate regulatory approval in all target markets. What's your timeline for completing the required safety certifications? A bead of sweat formed at Thora's temple. We anticipate expedited approvals based on our existing certifications in North American markets. Interesting, Mr. Park commented. considering the significant differences between North American and Asian flame retardant standards. The room temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. Thora's gaze flicked to Devon and Willa, seated in the front row, then back to her slides. "Perhaps I should skip ahead to our compliance strategy," she said, clicking forward several slides. "As you can see, we've developed a comprehensive approach to meeting all regulatory requirements." Lane Perkins rose from her seat at the side of the room. "Before you continue, I believe we should address some discrepancies in the materials presented today." Evan, the CEO, nodded. "Please proceed, Lane." She walked to the front, tablet in hand. "With your permission, I'd like to display some additional documents relevant to this discussion." When Thora hesitated, Evan spoke again. "Please connect Miss Perkins' device, Thora." The atmosphere in the room shifted as Lane's screen replaced Thora's presentation. The first document displayed was the risk assessment spreadsheet I'd discovered, the one calculating acceptable consumer incidence against profit margins. "This document," Lane explained calmly, "details a deliberate strategy to circumvent safety regulations in Asian markets by using non-compliant materials while calculating the financial impact of potential injuries and fatalities." Mr. Tanaka leaned forward, his expression darkening as he studied the figures. "There must be some mistake," Thora said quickly. "I've never seen this document before." Lane swiped to the next screen. An email chain with Thora's name clearly visible in the sender field, discussing how to manage test results that didn't meet requirements. "This can't be authentic," Thora insisted, her voice rising slightly. "Someone has clearly manipulated these emails." "The metadata and server logs confirm their authenticity," Lane replied, "as do the sworn statements from 3 members of your team who have come forward in exchange for immunity." At this, Thora's head snapped toward Devon and Willa. Devon stared at the table, refusing to meet her eyes. Willa looked back defiantly, and I suddenly understood who had blown the whistle first. "Additionally," Lane continued, displaying a new document, "we have confirmation that the inappropriate comments attributed to Piper Chaudhry were fabricated as part of an effort to discredit her after she raised safety concerns." All eyes turned to me briefly. I kept my expression neutral, though my heart pounded so loudly I was certain everyone could hear it. For the next 40 minutes, Lane methodically presented evidence of systematic fraud, willful negligence, and attempted cover-up. Emails, meeting recordings, budget manipulations, all pointing to Thora and her inner circle. Throughout it all, Thora attempted various defenses: denial, claims of misunderstanding, suggestions that she was being set up by competitors. With each new piece of evidence, her protests grew weaker. When Lane finished, Graham broke the heavy silence. "Mr. Tanaka, Miss Chen, Mr. Park, on behalf of the board, I extend our deepest apologies for what you've witnessed today. I assure you this behavior represents neither our values nor our standard practices." Miss Chen spoke carefully. "Had these products entered our markets as planned, the consequences could have been tragic. Buildings filled with families, schools with children, all with materials designed to appear safe while actually increasing fire danger. We will require complete transparency moving forward," Mr. Park added, "and significant assurances before any products are approved." Graham nodded. "You'll have it. We'll be implementing a complete restructuring of our product development and compliance departments effective immediately." Thora made one last attempt. "This is clearly a misunderstanding that we can clarify with additional context. If I could just explain our actual intentions." "That won't be necessary," Evan interrupted. "Security will escort you, Devon, and Kenzie to collect your personal belongings. Your employment is terminated effective immediately." The silence that followed felt like a physical weight. Then came the most unexpected moment of all. Willa stood up. "I'd like to make a statement. I participated in these actions under pressure and threat of career sabotage. While that doesn't excuse my behavior, I want to acknowledge that Piper Chaudhry tried repeatedly to address these safety issues through proper channels and was systematically blocked and undermined." All eyes turned to me again. Graham cleared his throat. "Miss Chaudhry, would you come forward, please?" Walking to the front of that room, past Thora's burning glare, was the longest 30 feet of my life. My legs felt like they might give way with each step. "In light of what we've learned," Graham said, "the board would like to offer you the position of Vice President of International Compliance and Product Safety, a new role reporting directly to the board. Your integrity in this situation has been noted and valued." The rest of the meeting passed in a blur. Security arrived to escort Thora, Devon, and Kenzie out. The regulatory officials had private conversations with board members. People shook my hand and patted my shoulder. 2 hours later, I found myself alone in the conference room, still trying to process everything that had happened. The door opened, and Lane stepped in. "Quite a day," she said, sitting across from me. "Did you know the board would offer me that position?" I asked. She shook her head. "That was their decision. A good one, I think. What happens now? To Thora and the others? Beyond termination?" Lane considered. "The board has authorized me to cooperate with regulatory authorities in all 3 countries if they pursue civil penalties. And given the evidence of fraud and the potential harm to consumers, criminal charges are possible." I exhaled slowly. "It's hard to believe it's over." "Almost over," Lane corrected. "There's still the matter of rebuilding the department and establishing proper compliance protocols. That's where you come in." 3 weeks later, I was settling into my new office when my assistant announced an unexpected visitor. "Thora." "5 minutes," I told him. "No longer." She entered looking nothing like the polished executive I'd known. Her hair was pulled back carelessly, her clothes rumpled as if she'd been sleeping in them. "They're investigating me for criminal negligence," she said without preamble. "My reputation is destroyed. 15 years of work, gone." I said nothing, waiting. "You could speak for me," she continued, a note of desperation entering her voice. "Tell them I was just aggressive about deadlines, not deliberately ignoring safety." "That would be a lie," I replied calmly. "The spreadsheet calculating acceptable casualties made your intentions clear. That was Devon's work, not mine. Under your direction, with your approval." She slumped into the chair across from my desk. "What do you want? Money? A public apology?" "I don't want anything from you, Thora. The truth came out. That's enough." "You've ruined me," she whispered. I leaned forward. "No. You ruined yourself the moment you decided profit margins were worth more than human lives." After she left, I opened my desk drawer and pulled out the note that had been left on my windshield months ago. "Know when to keep quiet." I took a photo of it next to my new office nameplate and texted it to Zoe with the caption, "Sometimes knowing when to speak up matters more." 6 months later, our new, fully compliant building materials began entering Asian markets with the highest safety ratings in the industry. The additional research and development had cost millions, but as Evan noted during the launch celebration, integrity isn't expensive, it's priceless. The regulatory officials who had witnessed Thora's downfall became our strongest advocates, helping navigate approval processes that our competitors found challenging. In my new role, I established anonymous reporting channels for safety concerns and implemented protection protocols for whistleblowers. Every quarter, I personally reviewed compliance reports with an independent auditor. On the anniversary of that fateful board meeting, I received an email from an address I didn't recognize. It contained just one line. "You were right. I was wrong. I'm sorry." No signature was needed. I knew who it was from. That evening, Andy and I celebrated with a quiet dinner at home. As we raised glasses to mark the occasion, she asked, "Was it worth it? All the stress and uncertainty?" I thought about the products now keeping families safe, the company culture that had transformed, and the young employees who now felt empowered to raise concerns without fear. "Every moment," I replied. "Some fights are worth having, even when you're not sure you'll win." I later learned that Thora had eventually found work at a small consulting firm. Her influence and reputation permanently diminished. Devon had left the industry entirely. Willa, who had cooperated with investigators, was working in quality assurance at a competitor, her experience a cautionary tale she shared openly. As for me, I discovered that doing the right thing isn't always easy, but living with yourself afterward is much simpler when you've followed your conscience. If you've ever stood up against wrongdoing or wondered if you should, I'd love to hear your story in the comments. Sometimes knowing you're not alone in facing difficult ethical choices makes all the difference. Like this video if it resonated with you, and subscribe for more stories about courage in unexpected places. Remember, in the battle between profit and principle, your voice matters more than you know. Junior staff eats in the break room. Camille announced loudly enough for the entire reception area to hear. Her hand clamped around my wrist as I reached for a bacon-wrapped date from the silver tray. She yanked me back just as Blake Newman, the CEO whose 8-figure contract I'd spent 6 months securing, turned toward me with recognition dawning in his eyes. "But she was just explaining her strategy for," Blake began. "Company policy," Camille cut him off with practiced charm. "I'm sure you understand the importance of hierarchy during these functions. Our executives will walk you through everything." I stood frozen as Camille's fingernails dug crescents into my skin. The crystal chandeliers threw diamonds of light across the meticulously arranged dining room, the room I had personally selected for tonight's celebration. The centerpieces I'd designed, the menu I'd curated specifically to Blake's preferences after weeks of research. The break room is that way, Camille whispered, her breath hot against my ear. There's leftover pizza in the fridge. Try not to make a mess. She released me with a subtle push. Every eye in the room followed my humiliation, some with pity, others with quiet satisfaction. My boss Dom stood at the head table, raising his glass in a toast, as if I didn't exist, as if my name wasn't on every slide of the presentation he was about to take credit for. The break room door closed behind me with a soft click. Through the small window, I watched them settle into their seats, and 23 executives about to feast on my success. My reflection stared back at me, hair carefully styled, dress purchased specifically for tonight, eyes hollow with disbelief. 6 years of working until midnight. 6 years of brilliant ideas whispered to Dom in private, only to hear him announce them in meetings as his own. 6 years of being the invisible architect behind every major account. I slid down against the wall, phone clutched in my palm. I'd promised myself I would never make this call, that I would earn my place on merit alone. My thumb hovered over the contact simply labeled G. Beyond the door, I heard Dom's voice rising. Revolutionary approach that came to me during my vacation in. I pressed the button. She answered on the second ring. Tess? It's been too long. Her voice carried the weight of old money and older power. I need that favor, I whispered. Tonight. 20 minutes later, I stood before the bathroom mirror, splashing cold water on my face. My hands trembled. What had I done? What would happen when the break room door swung open? There you are. Dom's voice boomed with false cheer. We've been looking everywhere for you. His smile didn't match the panic in his eyes. Something wrong? I asked, drying my hands slowly. There's been a development. You're needed at the table. Immediately. Before I could respond, he grabbed my elbow, steering me through the corridor with bruising urgency. Listen carefully, he hissed. Geneva Harrington just arrived, unannounced, claims she's the majority shareholder behind Newman Enterprises and wants to meet the brilliant mind behind the campaign. Blake seems terrified of her. Whatever you do, don't. We rounded the corner to the dining room, and he fell silent. She stood at the center of the room, commanding attention in a tailored burgundy suit that cost more than my yearly salary. Silver hair cut in a sharp bob that framed piercing eyes currently fixed on the entrance. On me. Tess, Geneva's voice cut through the hushed room. There you are. Every head turned. Camille's face drained of color. You know her? Dom whispered, fingers digging into my arm. Before I could answer, Geneva crossed the room, her heels clicking a death march against the hardwood floor. I was just telling everyone how disappointed I am, she said loud enough for all to hear, that my goddaughter wasn't seated at the main table. The silence in the room became a living thing. Goddaughter? Dom's voice cracked. Did I stutter? Geneva's smile was a weapon. Now, who decided that the architect of this entire partnership should eat pizza in a break room while others take credit for her work? If you're feeling the tension building in this room, imagine living it. Share your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever been in a situation where someone tried to erase your contributions? Like and subscribe to hear how this confrontation unfolds, because trust me, what happens next changed the trajectory of my entire career. My name is Tess Whitley. I'm 32 years old, and until that night, I'd built my career on being indispensable yet invisible. The reliable genius behind every successful campaign who somehow never appeared in the victory photos. I grew up with Geneva Harrington as a distant but watchful presence in my life. My mother had been her executive assistant before cancer took her when I was 11. Geneva had paid for my education but insisted I make my own way professionally. The world respects what is earned, not what is given, she always said. So I never used her name, never dropped hints about my connection to one of the wealthiest women in the country. I wanted to rise on merit alone. My first position at Landmark Promotions seemed perfect, a boutique agency with big dreams. Dom Petrova hired me as a junior strategist, impressed by my portfolio. For the first year, we worked well together. He recognized my ideas, gave appropriate credit. Then Landmark landed its first major client. During the pitch meeting, I watched Dom present my overnight work as his morning inspiration. The client loved it. Dom received a bonus. I received a mug that said, Team Player. The pattern continued. I'd develop innovative campaigns, Dom would tweak one minor detail and claim ownership. When I confronted him privately, his response cut deep. Ideas need a face people trust. Yours isn't it. Be grateful I bring your concepts to life. I considered leaving, but every promising interview ended when potential employers called Landmark for references. Somehow, those opportunities evaporated. I later learned Dom told companies I was creative but unreliable, ensuring I remained under his thumb. Then came the Newman account. Blake Newman had built a tech empire from nothing and needed a complete brand overhaul before taking his company public. Every agency in the city wanted this contract. Dom assigned me to background research, nothing more. But I saw something in Newman's trajectory others missed. While the creative team developed sleek, modern concepts, I secretly built an alternative campaign centered on Newman's humble beginnings, the human story behind the technology. The night before the pitch, Dom rejected all the official concepts. In desperation, he discovered my hidden files. This might work, he muttered, scrolling through my presentation. Why didn't you bring this to me earlier? I tried, I reminded him, 3 times. The next day, I watched from the back of the room as Dom presented my work with such conviction, you'd think he'd birthed every slide personally. Blake Newman leaned forward, captivated. When he signed the contract, triple the size of any previous Landmark client, he shook Dom's hand and said, "You really understood me, not just my company." The celebration dinner was planned for 6 months later, after the successful launch of Newman's rebranded empire. I had assumed my invitation was assured. I had managed every detail of the campaign implementation, often working until dawn. Blake knew my name from countless emails and calls, yet here I stood in the dining room, watching Camille's face transition from shock to calculation as Geneva's words hung in the air. There must be some misunderstanding, Camille recovered quickly. We rotate staff at these functions. Next time, rotate? Geneva cut her off. Like furniture? How fascinating. Her gaze swept the room before landing on Blake Newman. Blake, did you know that the campaign concept you praised Dom for was actually created by Tess? That the personal touches you appreciated so much came from her understanding of your journey, not his? Blake's expression darkened. Is that true? Dom stepped forward. We all contributed. In a team environment, show him, Geneva said to me. Show him your original notes. My phone felt heavy in my hand. I have them here. From 6 months ago, with timestamps. The room grew impossibly quiet as I pulled up the files and handed my phone to Blake. As he scrolled, his jaw tightened. These are dated weeks before our first meeting, he said finally, and they're identical to what was presented, down to the tagline. Dom laughed nervously. Tess is an essential team member. That's why we value her so much. Perhaps there's been a... Stop talking. Blake's voice cut like glass. He turned to Geneva. I presume this dinner was meant to discuss our next steps? She nodded once. Then I'd like to have that conversation with the person who actually understood my vision, not someone who stole it. His eyes found mine. Tess, would you join me at the table? Dom's hand gripped my shoulder. As her superior, you should probably start updating your resume, Geneva suggested pleasantly. Because after tonight, I suspect your services won't be required at Landmark, or anywhere my influence reaches. The blood drained from Dom's face. Camille stepped forward, survival instinct kicking in. This is highly inappropriate. I'm the event coordinator, and I'm still waiting to understand why my goddaughter was directed to eat cold pizza while watching through a window as others celebrated her achievement, Geneva interrupted. Perhaps you can explain that to me. In the break room, Camille's mouth opened and closed, no sound emerging. A server appeared, pulling out the chair at the head of the table, for me. As I moved to take my seat, Dom blocked my path. You planned this, he hissed. You've just ruined years of relationships. No, I whispered back. You did that yourself, one stolen idea at a time. The entire room watched as I sat down beside Blake Newman and Geneva. My heart pounded so loudly I was certain everyone could hear it. 6 years of invisibility crystallized into this moment of terrifying visibility. Blake leaned toward me. I want to hear the whole campaign again, from the actual source. I took a deep breath and began to speak. Across the room, through the break room window, I could see Dom and Camille watching. For the first time, they were the ones looking in from the outside. But this was just the beginning. What happened after dinner would transform not just my career, but the entire power structure of Landmark Promotions. And Dom hadn't even begun to understand what my phone call had set in motion. The dinner progressed like a perfectly choreographed dance of power shifts. With every question Blake asked, with every answer I provided, Dom's face grew paler across the room. Through the break room window, I watched him frantically texting, his thumb jabbing at his phone like he could stab his way out of this nightmare. The insight about connecting your childhood innovation lab to the company's founding story, that was brilliant, Blake said, cutting into his steak. It made the technology feel human. That came from reading about how you built your first prototype in your grandmother's garage, I replied. Most tech companies hide their messy beginnings. Yours needed to be celebrated. Geneva sipped her wine, watching me with quiet approval. Tell them about the logo redesign. For the next hour, I walked through every element of the campaign. The senior vice presidents who had ignored me for months now leaned forward, hanging on my words. The creative directors who had rejected my ideas repeatedly now nodded along as if they'd supported me all along. When dessert arrived, Blake set down his spoon and turned to face me directly. I have a confession, he said. I almost pulled the contract 3 weeks ago. A collective intake of breath circled the table. The implementation wasn't matching what had been promised. The emails I received from Dom lacked the understanding I'd experienced in our initial meetings. Blake glanced toward the break room. Then someone named Tess started copying herself on all communications, providing additional context, sending midnight clarifications. Suddenly, everything aligned again. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a business card. I made a call to my private investigator, asked him to find out who was really driving this partnership. My throat went dry. He discovered something interesting. Blake turned the card over. On the back, in handwritten notes, Tess Whitley, real architect. Senior team takes credit. Pattern established. You knew? I whispered. For weeks, Blake smiled. I was planning to request you personally manage our account moving forward. I just didn't realize I'd be making that request during such theatrical circumstances. Geneva laughed. Theatrical is my specialty. The company president, Alan Ward, who had remained strategically silent throughout dinner, finally cleared his throat. Miss Whitley, perhaps we should discuss your position at Landmark first thing tomorrow morning. Why wait? Geneva countered. I find that important business decisions are best made while the situation remains fresh. Alan loosened his collar. Of course, Tess, effective immediately. You'll be promoted to Executive Creative Director, Geneva suggested, with the Newman account under her exclusive management. Alan nodded too quickly. Exactly what I was thinking. And compensation adjustment retroactive to the beginning of the Newman project, Blake added, to reflect her actual contributions. I sat stunned as they negotiated my future across dessert plates. 6 years of invisibility transformed in a single evening. When dinner concluded, Blake shook my hand firmly. I look forward to working directly with you from now on. He lowered his voice. And I admire your restraint. In your position, I might have done something far less civilized than making a phone call. If only he knew what I had planned. Geneva walked me to her waiting car, her driver holding the door. You should have called me sooner, she said. I wanted to succeed on my own terms. And how did that work out for you? Her eyebrow arched. Sometimes power needs to recognize power, Tess. False humility serves no one. I glanced back at the restaurant. Through the window, I could see Dom and Camille still sitting in the break room, their faces locked in silent argument. What happens to them now? I asked. Geneva's smile turned sharp. That depends entirely on you. The next morning, I arrived at Landmark to discover my belongings had been moved overnight. Not to a cubicle with a window as I'd hoped for years, but to Dom's corner office. His name had already been removed from the door. My phone buzzed with messages from colleagues who had witnessed my humiliation the night before, now falling over themselves to congratulate me. The same people who had watched in silence for years as my ideas were stolen suddenly claimed they'd always known I was the real talent. I set my bag down on the massive desk and traced my fingers over the polished surface. Dom's family photo was gone, but the ghost of his presence remained. The office door opened without a knock. Camille stood there, clutching a tablet to her chest like armor. Alan wants to see you in the conference room, she said, her voice stripped of its usual authority. Everyone's waiting. Everyone? The entire creative team, and Dom. I followed her through the hallway, aware of eyes tracking my movement through glass partitions. Whispers trailed in my wake. The conference room door felt heavier than usual as I pushed it open. 14 faces turned toward me. At the head of the table sat Alan. To his right, Dom, his expression carved from stone. Tess. Alan gestured to the empty chair at the opposite end of the table. Or, should I say, Executive Creative Director Whitley. I took my seat, feeling the weight of expectation press against my shoulders. As you all know, last night revealed some organizational challenges. Alan chose his words carefully. In light of recent developments, we're implementing immediate changes to our leadership structure. Dom's knuckles whitened against the table edge. Tess will be taking over creative direction for the Newman account and all major client relationships moving forward. Alan continued. Dom will be transitioning to a new role as, "This is absurd," Dom cut in. "One dinner with her godmother, and suddenly she's qualified to lead? She's been here 6 years without a single promotion. Ask yourselves why." Silence stretched across the table. "Because you blocked everyone," I said quietly. "Because you took credit for my work while telling other companies I was unreliable when they tried to hire me." Dom's laugh held no humor. "Paranoid as always. Maybe you weren't promoted because your ideas only work when refined by someone with actual experience. Is that why you presented my original Newman pitch without changes?" I pulled out my phone. "I recorded our meeting the night before the Newman presentation, when you found my backup concept and claimed it as your own." The blood drained from Dom's face. "You what?" "After 3 years of watching you steal my work, I started documenting everything. I set my phone on the table. Every presentation you claimed as yours. Every email where you copied my language verbatim. Every meeting where you dismissed my ideas only to present them later as your own." Alan's expression hardened. "Dom, is this true?" "She's manipulating the situation." Dom's voice rose. "She makes minor contributions and expects full credit. Ask anyone on the team." All eyes turned to the creative team members, who suddenly found the table surface fascinating. "Layla," I said gently to the youngest designer, "who actually created the Newman logo that won the industry award last month?" Layla glanced nervously at Dom before answering. I gave my concept to you, and you passed it to Dom for review." "And what happened after that?" She swallowed hard. "Dom presented it as his design evolution of your original concept." Dom slammed his hand on the table. "This is a coordinated attack. Yesterday, I'm the creative leader of this agency. Today, I'm being ambushed because her godmother happens to be Geneva Harrington?" "No," I corrected him. "You're facing consequences because Blake Newman hired a private investigator who uncovered your pattern of theft weeks ago." Geneva just accelerated the timeline. The room fell silent. Dom's face cycled through shock, disbelief, and finally, calculation. "Fine." He straightened his jacket. "If that's how we're playing this, Alan, I quit, effective immediately. And I'm taking the Westbrook account with me. They're loyal to me personally." Alan's expression didn't change. "Actually, they're not." "Excuse me?" Blake Newman called Westbrook's CEO this morning. Apparently, they play golf together. He shared some concerns about credit attribution at Landmark. Dom's confidence faltered. "Westbrook has been my client for 4 years, and they've requested Tess take over their account immediately," Alan finished, along with 3 other clients who received similar calls. "It seems Mr. Newman has been quite busy." The room spun around me. This wasn't part of my plan. I had expected to confront Dom myself, on my terms, not to have others fighting battles I had prepared for years to wage. Dom turned to me, hatred burning in his eyes. "Congratulations. You've destroyed a decade of relationships in one night." "Those relationships were built on my work," I replied evenly. "The only thing I destroyed was the illusion that it was yours." He stood abruptly. "You think this is over? That you can humiliate me and walk away? I built this place while you were fetching coffee." "No, Dom. I built this place while you were taking credit." His smile turned cruel. "We'll see how well you do without someone to polish your rough ideas. You may have the title now, but you lack what it takes to lead. Always have." He stormed out, leaving a vacuum of tension behind him. Alan cleared his throat. "Well, that was. Let's take a short break before discussing transition plans." As the room emptied, Camille lingered behind, hovering near my chair. "I want to apologize for last night," she said, her voice oddly soft. "The seating arrangement wasn't my idea," Dom insisted. "He said you'd understand it was just business." I studied her face, searching for sincerity and finding calculation instead. 6 years, Camille. You watched it happen for 6 years. She had the grace to look away. "We all did what we needed to survive here. And now you're doing what you need to survive under new leadership." Her smile tightened. "We're professionals. Adjusting to new circumstances is what we do." As she walked away, my phone buzzed with a text from Geneva. "Phase 1 complete. Ready for Phase 2? I stared at the message, my finger hovering over the reply button. The rush of this morning's victory was already fading. leaving a hollow space where my anger had lived for years. Dom was gone, but the system that enabled him remained, filled with people who had watched my talent being stripped from me daily and said nothing. A promotion and corner office wouldn't erase those years. The real revenge I had planned went much deeper than professional humiliation. I typed back, "Tonight, 8 p.m., bring the documents." Because Dom had made one critical mistake in his years of theft, one that went far beyond stolen ideas and borrowed acclaim, one that would not only end his career but potentially send him to prison. And everyone who had enabled him was about to learn exactly what happened when you pushed the quiet one too far. Geneva's car idled outside my apartment building at exactly 8 p.m. I slid into the back seat beside her, my laptop bag heavy on my knees. "Congratulations on your promotion," she said, handing me a glass of something amber from the built-in bar, though I suspect it feels hollow. It does. I took a sip, the liquid burning my throat. Everyone at the office is suddenly my best friend. People who never remembered my name are sending me lunch invitations. Geneva's laugh lacked warmth. Success attracts parasites. Speaking of which, have you heard from Dom? He cleaned out his office this afternoon, left his company phone and laptop. I stared out the window as the city blurred past. But he's been calling board members, telling them I manipulated the situation. And how is that working out for him? Mixed results. 3 directors believe him. 2 are waiting to see what happens next. Geneva nodded thoughtfully. "And what is happening next, Tess?" I opened my laptop. "That depends on what you brought me." She reached into her briefcase and pulled out a flash drive. "Everything you requested. Bank statements, private emails, transaction records. My investigators are thorough." I plugged it into my laptop, scanning the files that appeared. My breath caught. "It's worse than I thought. Much worse," Geneva confirmed. "Dom wasn't just stealing your ideas. He was stealing from the company itself." The evidence laid bare on my screen told a damning story. For years, Dom had been running a scheme where he created phantom vendor accounts for Landmark's projects. He'd submit inflated invoices from these fake companies for consulting services that were never performed, then approve the payments himself as creative director. The money flowed directly to accounts he controlled. Most disturbing were the emails showing he'd specifically targeted projects I'd developed, using my concepts not just for professional advancement but for financial fraud. "How much?" I asked quietly. "Nearly $2 million over 5 years, Geneva replied, carefully spread across dozens of accounts. He was clever about it. "Not clever enough," I murmured, scrolling through the evidence. "Does the board know?" "Not yet. I thought you should decide how this information comes to light." I closed my laptop. "I need to think about this carefully." "Don't wait too long," Geneva cautioned. "My source says Dom has a meeting tomorrow with Landmark's biggest competitor. He's planning to bring client information with him." The car pulled up to a restaurant I didn't recognize. A discreet establishment with no sign, just a single blue door on a quiet street. "I thought we could discuss strategy over dinner," Geneva explained as the driver opened our door. "Someone is expecting us." Inside, the restaurant was nearly empty, with only a few tables occupied by people who looked important enough not to acknowledge others. In the back corner, a solitary figure waited. "Blake?" I said in surprise as we approached. Blake Newman stood, shaking my hand. "Tess, glad you could make it." "You two know each other beyond business?" I asked, looking between him and Geneva. "Old friends," Geneva explained as we sat. "We serve on several boards together, including one that might interest you," Blake added. "The Investor Alliance for Ethical Business." Blake added. I felt a strange sense of manipulation settling over me. "Is that why you hired a private investigator to look into Dom, because Geneva asked you to?" "Quite the opposite," Blake said. "I hired the investigator because something felt off about how Landmark operated. When my investigator mentioned your name repeatedly as the uncredited source of the work I admired, I called Geneva to ask if she knew you." "Imagine my surprise," Geneva said dryly, "discovering my goddaughter was the same Tess my friend couldn't stop talking about. So last night wasn't just about my promotion, I realized. You were gathering evidence." "The promotion was deserved," Blake said firmly. "But yes, we needed to create a situation where Dom would reveal himself." "And he performed beautifully," Geneva added. "His outburst this morning, his threats, his attempts to contact clients, all documented by people we trust." I felt anger building in my chest. "So, I was bait? All of this was orchestrated without my knowledge?" "No, Tess," Geneva countered. "You were the catalyst. The phone call was your choice. What followed was opportunity." "What exactly are you proposing?" I asked, suddenly wary. Blake leaned forward. Landmark's board meets tomorrow at noon. Dom has requested time to present his side of the story. Claims of harassment, professional sabotage. That's absurd. It's predictable, Geneva corrected. Powerful people rarely accept accountability. They rewrite narratives where they're the victims. So what do I do? That, Geneva said, sliding a folder across the table, is entirely your decision, but we've prepared some options. Inside the folder was a detailed plan. Times, talking points, legal precedents, and a list of people who would support my version of events. The final page contained something unexpected, an offer letter. What is this? I asked, reading the company name. Visionary Partners. My new venture? Blake explained. A creative incubator for ethical innovation. The position is yours if you want it. Triple your current salary, full creative control, and proper credit for all your work. I stared at them both. You're offering me a way out. We're offering you choices, Geneva corrected. Stay at Landmark as their rising star. Leave for a guaranteed position with Blake. Or burn it all down, she said simply. Show the board what Dom has been doing with company funds while stealing your ideas. The evidence on that drive is enough for criminal charges. The restaurant seemed to fade around me as I considered my options. The easy path beckoned. Take Blake's offer. Walk away from Landmark. Start fresh. But something in me resisted. If I expose Dom, I said slowly, what happens to Landmark? Their reputation takes a hit, Blake admitted. But firms survive scandals every day. And the people who watched it happen? Who benefited from my work being stolen? Geneva's expression softened slightly. This isn't just about justice for you anymore, is it? It never was, I realized. It's about a system that rewards theft and punishes those who create. The next morning, I arrived at Landmark's offices an hour before the board meeting. The weekend cleaning crew had left Dom's former office spotless, erasing the last physical traces of his presence. I set up my laptop and waited. Board members began filtering in around 11:30. Alan nodded nervously as he passed my open door. At 11:45, I gathered my materials and walked to the conference room. The tension was palpable as I entered. 8 board members sat in silent judgment, with Alan at the head of the table. Dom had arrived early and sat midway down, his expression confident. Beside him sat Camille and 2 senior directors who had benefited most from his stolen ideas. Tess, Alan gestured to an empty chair. We were just about to begin. Actually, I said, remaining standing, I'd like to address the board first, if that's acceptable. Dom smirked. Eager to defend yourself? I ignored him, focusing on the board members. Before Dom presents his version of events, I believe you should review some information that came into my possession. I distributed folders to each board member. These documents show a pattern of financial fraud committed over the past 5 years. Phantom vendors, fake invoices, money diverted to personal accounts. Dom's face drained of color. This is absurd. She's fabricating. The evidence has been verified by independent forensic accountants. I continued calmly. Bank records, email trails, your signature on every fraudulent approval. One board member looked up sharply. Is this accurate? We're talking about significant amounts. Almost $2 million, I confirmed. Dom stood, his chair scraping against the floor. This is a coordinated attack. First, she ambushes me with her godmother. Now these false accusations. The police have already been notified. I cut in. They're waiting downstairs with the company's outside counsel. The room erupted into chaos. Dom lunged toward me, but Alan stepped between us. Enough, Alan shouted. Dom, sit down. You can't possibly believe this. Dom appealed to the board. I built this company's creative reputation. With her work, a quiet voice said from the doorway. Every head turned to see Layla standing there, clutching a thumb drive. I have copies, she said, her voice trembling but determined, of original files, timestamps showing when Tess created concepts and when Dom modified them to present as his own. Going back 4 years, another designer appeared behind her, then another. Soon, 6 members of the creative team stood in solidarity. Dom's confident facade crumbled completely. This is a witch hunt. You're all ungrateful. The only thing we're guilty of, Layla interrupted, is staying silent too long. 2 security guards appeared in the doorway. Alan nodded toward Dom. Please escort Mr. Petrova to the lobby. Company counsel is waiting. As Dom was led away, shouting threats and accusations, I finally took my seat. The financial fraud is only part of this. I told the remaining board members. For years, Landmark has operated under a system that rewards idea theft and punishes innovation. It's not just Dom, it's cultural. I laid out my vision for restructuring the creative department, transparent attribution, collaborative workflows, proper credit for all team members. By the time I finished, the board was listening with genuine interest. "You've given us a lot to consider," the chairwoman said finally, "and saved the company from potentially devastating fraud charges. What do you want in return?" "I'm not staying," I said simply. Alan's head snapped up. "But your promotion—" "I've accepted a position elsewhere," I explained. "But before I go, I want to ensure the people who actually create the work this company profits from are properly recognized and compensated." I pushed a document across the table, a restructuring plan that promoted Layla and others who had been overlooked for years. "This isn't negotiable. It's the price of my discretion about how long this fraud continued while the board remained oblivious." 3 hours later, I walked out of Landmark for the last time. The creative team gathered in the lobby, uncertain but hopeful about their futures under new leadership. Layla hugged me tightly. "I can't believe you're leaving after fighting so hard." "Some places can't be fixed from within," I told her, "but I'll be watching to make sure they keep their promises to all of you." Outside, Geneva's car waited at the curb. "It's done?" she asked as I slid into the back seat. "Not exactly as planned," I admitted, "but better." "How so?" "Dom's facing charges. The board is restructuring the creative department based on my recommendations. And instead of taking Blake's offer," I smiled, "I'm starting my own agency, with Landmark's blessing, and 3 of their former clients as my first accounts." Geneva's eyebrow raised. "That wasn't one of the options we discussed." "I'm tired of other people determining my options." I watched the Landmark building recede in the rear window. The best revenge isn't just exposing theft or punishing the guilty. It's creating something new that wouldn't exist without you. 6 months later, my new agency occupied a modest office downtown. Our staff numbered only 12, but our reputation for transparent creative attribution attracted both clients and talent. On my wall hung a framed news article about Dom's indictment and Landmark's subsequent creative renaissance under Layla's leadership. Blake Newman remained our biggest client. Geneva, to my surprise, became a silent partner. And every employee contract included what we called the Whitley Clause, guaranteeing proper credit for all creative work, regardless of title or tenure. The true revenge wasn't the public humiliation of that dinner, or even Dom's criminal charges. It was creating a place where talent couldn't be stolen, where ideas belonged to their creators, and where the quiet ones never had to make desperate phone calls to be seen. If you've ever had your work stolen or been pushed aside while others took credit for your contributions, remember this: your revenge doesn't have to be destruction. Sometimes, the most powerful response is to build something better, something that wouldn't exist without you. Leave a comment sharing your story, and subscribe to hear more about navigating workplace injustice with integrity. The best comeback isn't just surviving, it's thriving on your own terms.